reconfiguring them from, I think there's 6 lots that exist right now, and they'll be turning that into 4 lots. This is just an aerial photo that shows where this is along 200 North, and then this next slide will just show the a screenshot of the final plat that shows Lot 1 is where the Golden West Credit Union currently exists. There is a lot line adjustment that's going on between those 2 lots, and Lot 2 has purchased a few feet of property from Lot 1 through this whole transaction. Lot 2 is where a proposed Mr. Car Wash would go, and then 3 and 4 is, they are in the works of bringing a mixed-use project to us in the next few months. So they're essentially waiting for this final plat approval to be able to bring forward those other 2 projects. So we have had a review of this done by our staff. The lot sizes, frontage requirements, and minimum. We don't have any minimum lot sizes or widths in our commercial zone, but it does meet all of our zoning regulations. Our city attorney or engineer has also done a review of the plat and finds that in compliance with the requirements set out in our subdivision title, including the construction drawings that are required to have submitted with the application. So we are recommending approval of the final plat this evening. There is a representative here from Terraform. Joe's here if the commission has any questions.
Yeah.
Or if the commission has questions for me as well.
We'll start with questions for the staff. Any questions for the staff? I'm not seeing any, so any questions for the applicant?
I've got a couple of questions.
Come up, yeah.
I think you've answered, Melinda, the question about the zoning. It's general commercial. General commercial allows car wash, obviously, because we have a bunch of them in the city. Already in the general commercial zone, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the general commercial allows retail sales and services, and we define as car wash as a retail sale or service.
Okay.
A retail service.
Okay. And it's going to be located on more than an acre of ground for the car wash? Is it Joe? Yeah, come on up to the speaker. It needs an acre for the car wash. I'm going to kind of ask a question that's a little bit presumptive, but is there a way to orient the car wash so that the tunnel does not reflect sound to the south, to the residential area? I know this is a site plan issue. We don't do site plans here, but I do have a concern about how loud the car washes are. I don't know what kind of technology you employ or what the name of the car wash is going to be, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have a site plan?
Well, here, just because it's so small up there, but this is
So,
a larger version. I can pull up a site plan.
if I'm remembering correctly, the tunnel exits towards 200.
Yes, that's correct.
And that is your loud
Is
That's
going
the
out?
end that is exponentially louder than
Okay.
So
Okay.
that has all the dryers and everything.
Okay.
Yeah, the blowers are oriented to the north with let me see. I know we've done a couple reviews of their site plans, so let me see if I can pull it up.
We also have the vacuums are also on the north, the equipment for the vacuums. So they're in separate structures.
Right.
Yeah, and so they're on the north as well, so they're away from
Okay.
residential.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't have a problem with car washes. I use them all the time.
Yeah.
But they can be quite loud. And
Yeah.
if you live behind them, any kind of automotive or automotive service can be daunting for anybody who lives, even if it's 100 or 200 feet behind, especially with, late hours. I don't know what time you close, probably 9 or 10 o'clock?
So typically they're 7 to 7.
Oh, okay.
And, weather, they'll close down, and then winter, sometimes they'll close an hour later.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging. Okay.
Some of the other competitors run a little later. Mr. Car Wash is out at 7.
Okay. Thank you for answering those questions.
I too have had problems in the past with, well, that's,
I think this is just gonna be the renderings.
yeah, let me go to the other one. But I have had problems in the past in other communities with, those blowers can be really loud. Let me see if this is the right one. But yeah, the blowers are oriented out towards 200 North, and there will be a fence that'll go along the back end of the property. Yeah, so here's just kind of the quick,
So will that fence will it provide some type of sound barrier? Is that what you're trying to allude to, or is it?
sorry, what was that?
Will the fence be, kind of act as a sound barrier, or?
Maybe to a certain extent, but this is where, right, those blowers would be coming out towards 200, and then the vacuums.
And then I lied to you a little bit. One of them is on the north and one of them, can you hear me?
Better. Yeah, lean in.
I lied a little bit. One of the vacuum enclosures is on the north, the other one is there on the south. They generate a little bit of noise, but they are within an enclosure as well. So they're like.
They're covered.
I think 6'8" tall, and then with an open top.
Yeah. One other question about design. I know, and I apologize, I'm deviating from the plat. But in terms of lighting, after hours, after you've closed, I don't think it can be emphasized enough how important a really good lighting plan is. I don't know if you're employing a professional lighting expert, but I would strongly urge you guys to, because you have residential neighbors, and even late at night, even if it's facing out to the north, to tone the lighting down, have timers, have photo cells, whatever it might be, and make sure we don't have up lighting, but we have down lighting or wall wash lighting, and we use the correct color spectrum of light. You know, the automotive uses, gas stations tend to use the cool white light, which is the blue light, and if you use the warm white, which is more along the yellow spectrum, it makes a big difference. So just encouraging the staff to work, and you to work with the city on that, just for the sake of the neighbors.
Definitely will, and we are using professional lighting engineers.
Okay, good. I've worked with a bunch of them, and they're usually terrific if you just make sure they know what the priorities are. So thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay.
I have questions about the plat.
I think you can sit down. Thanks.
Up then. All right.
Am I okay?
Yep.
On the plat, I have some questions from a technical point of view. I've got several notes. I just wonder if we could go through those. I know the guy who drew this pretty well, Dave. I've worked with him for years. But if I could make some suggestions, the zoning of the property is not shown anywhere. You should show the zoning on the property, on the plat map. It should be either in a note or in the field, so that there's a record of what the zoning is at the time the property is built. So I'd recommend that you put GC zoning or GC zone somewhere on the property. And then your streets, we have frontage on 3 streets. None of those streets are shown as what they are. So I'd recommend that we put public streets, label those as public. Always label your streets as public or private. And then the half widths are not shown. They're not labeled. The half width is shown on 200 West, but 200 North and 100 West and 200 West, they're not labeled as what kind of a street they are. Should always have that. And then I've got a question about what parcel A is. Is parcel A a dedication? It looks like a street dedication, the 3,100 square feet. 2,131 square feet. Is that a street dedication to get it to its half width? It looks like it's a 90-foot right-of-way. Is that what 200 North is, a 90-foot right-of-way? See parcel A is that long, narrow strip along 200 North on the north side of the property.
I don't know what the width of 200 North is. It's a UDOT facility, so.
It's really confusing as to whether that's part of the plat. Is that property that's coming into the city's right-of-way? That really ought to be clarified. And it should also be labeled as no build in the notes or in the field. Anytime you have a parcel, you want to make sure it's listed as no build, so you can't put a structure inside of it. So really should know whether or not that's part of the subdivision.
That is a UDOT right-of-way there, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so if it's a dedication to UDOT, then
Yeah.
that should be noted.
So,
And then I don't see a point of beginning anywhere on the plat. There's a legal description, but there's no point of beginning. So these are just things for the document to be recorded so it's accurate. So when engineering or any property issue comes up in the future, they know where the dimensions were taken from. And then a couple of issues. There's another issue with there's a bunch of power easements here, especially between lots 1 and 2. And you've got power easements all over the place here. As this is going into a subdivision, I'd highly recommend that if you can get some of those power easements cleared off or consolidated, it would make a lot more sense. Because anywhere you've got those easements, especially those wide ones up at the top between 1 and 2, you're not going to be able to put any structure on it. It encumbers it a little bit. So that's just a general rule of thumb. Try to get your power easements consolidated and cleared off. If you've got old easements, and some of these look like they're pretty old, if they're no longer applicable, get rid of them because they'll encumber the property. Those easements will allow anybody to come in and dig, do stuff overhead. I would really watch out for that. These suggestions, by the way, I'm just trying to be helpful here, not make it difficult.
Just so you know, a lot of these easements, we are taking the overhead power lines and communication lines and undergrounding them. So that's why they follow the property line.
Yes.
So everything that's overhead is going to be removed back to 200. And if I'm remembering right, I think it's on the other side of the street that it's removed back to. But
well, and that holds true through right in between this Golden West and this lot 2. I don't know where the power easements are and the rest of that, but yes, they would be undergrounding from here out to 200.
Yeah. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. A lot of experience with this, it really helps at long range for anybody who deals with the property in the future. Let's see. There's no information on the plat that I can see about who the owner is. Contact information for the owner. You have it under the MCW Kaysville subdivision. Is there a title report that was submitted, a property report?
So they require a title report before recording. I don't know if Dexter has that yet or not,
Okay,
but they won't record without a current title report.
yeah. Recommendation would be, look at that title report and see what kind of encumbrances there might be on the property. Because if there's conflicts within the plat and you record it and there's all those encumbrances there, now you've got a problem. Because title identified it, but you've maybe encumbered property for somebody else and you don't know that it's there. So I'd strongly recommend a review of a title report. And then I see no contact information on who the subdivider is, which is always a good idea. And then on the bottom, on the signature blocks, it should just say city attorney, where it says, let's see if I can blow this up. Yeah, you've got an error at the bottom where it says Kaysville City Planning Commission. You've got that under the city engineer approval. So you need to change that to city engineer at the bottom. On the lower left, see that? The lower left block says city engineer approval, but at the bottom where the signature is, it says Kaysville City Planning Commission. Okay? Then as you go to the right, where it says city attorney approval, just, what was the error? Okay, I can't remember what it was. And then you don't need to say city mayor, just say mayor under council approval. And I think that was it. Anyway, those are recommendations to clean up the plat before it gets recorded.
Okay.
And if Dave squawks, just tell him it's payback for all the times that, I had to deal with him before. No, Dave's a really good guy. And his firm is top-notch too. I'm actually making this quicker and easier for him. Thank you, everybody, for being patient while I went through those.
So Paul, can we just do like a conditional approval based on what you're recommending there? Or what are you suggesting?
I would just, if we're recommending and everybody is okay with it, I would,
We're not recommending.
We're approving.
This is a final approval.
it doesn't go back to council?
Nope.
Okay, then if the planning commission's okay with it, I'll make a motion to approve the final plat as proposed with the concerns, recommendations, and notations that were made.
I'll second.
Okay, so we got a motion for approval and a second. So we'll start the voting with Commissioner Packer.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All right, the voting is unanimous, so you have the approval for the final plat.
Was the second done by Steve? Okay, Commissioner. Thank you.
All right, our next item of business is a public hearing to consider enacting a new section of Kaysville City Code, Title 17, Chapter 5, Water Efficient Landscape Standards. I'll turn the time over to the staff.
All right, well, speaking of missing a few things, I went back and looked at this again today and realized that there were a couple of items missing from the ordinance that Weaver Basin requires. So this has actually been in front of the Planning Commission 2 other times and in front of the council a couple times as well. And when the waterways landscaping recommendations first came out, they were incredibly strict and really made it so that a community like Kaysville that does not have a lot of staffing and resources wouldn't have been able to implement and enforce what they were asking us to put in place. Since that time, Weaver Basin has dialed back some of the requirements, and I think at this point in time, there are now 18 cities that have adopted these standards, or either kind of everything that they initially presented, or some of the less stringent standards, which they kind of let off last year, I think, in the middle of the year. So that said, we're back before the commission and then the city council to give one more try at implementing or approving an ordinance that would allow our residents to be able to participate in the Flip the Strip program. To date, Weaver Basin has processed 700 applications and reimbursed people a total of about $500,000. They have another 700 or so applications in their queue and have set aside $1 million for this year to have those projects completed. They do have a bunch of requirements in order to be eligible, and that's not anything that we would be associated with or need to track. They do all of that, but in order for our residents to be eligible for that program, they are requiring a few things of us, and it's really they're wanting the incoming development to be regulated and to minimize turf and put in some better waterwise landscaping requirement or regulations within their property. So I'll go through this pretty quickly, but this really comes on the tails of experience an entire year, last year, of complaints from our residents that were unhappy that we weren't eligible to participate. So this is really kind of my desire as a staff and Mindy and Dan to not go through another season where we have dozens and dozens of calls and emails and complaints from unhappy residents that want to do the right thing and flip their strip, but also want to be able to get a little bit of reimbursement for doing that. So honestly, my motivation is twofold. One is selfish. I don't want to field those calls. And the other is, this is, I think, the right thing to do. So that said, we figured that based on, I think what we're going to see going forward coming out of the state legislature each year, that it would be best to implement an entirely new chapter that would encapsulate all of these requirements rather than trying to go in and put them in each of our individual zones. So this recommendation would be to enact a new chapter within our Title 17 that would then contain all of the water-wise landscaping regulations within that chapter. We wanted to also, within this ordinance, provide some very strong suggestions as well as those recommendations. But really, hopefully you all had a chance to read through this. It does include definitions to get to that place where, with the regulations that will follow, that there's an understanding of what those definitions would mean. Now, one of the changes I did make today was to take this out and put it down here in this section. It seemed to be a better fit. So these general standards would be everything that we would want to see all new development across the board come in with, and that that section just was specific really to the residential development. So so I moved that down to a different section, so it's just carved out. So these items here, and these are the ones that Weber Basin is requiring. So no turf or grass in an area that is less than 8 feet wide. So that includes our park strips, our side yards. Really, it's not a functional grass area, and what they're really wanting to see is for developers, homeowners, residents to be very smart and strategic in where they're putting the grass. And they also do not want any turf placed in an area that has a slope of greater than 25%. So those are two of the requirements that would be for the new development regardless of the zoning of the property. And then of course we want to make sure that all the landscaping complies with our Clearview, and also we want them to maintain that landscaping in a manner that looks nice. So this brings us down to the next section, where this was the other part that I totally failed to include in the draft ordinance that was put in the application or in the agenda packet. So the other portion that Weber Basin is requiring is they do not want to see any more than 50% of a total landscaped area in non-residential zones to be turf. So they do have an exception for active recreation areas, and so that's like if you had a multifamily development that had a designated area for kids to go out and play soccer or that type of a thing, we wouldn't include that in the total. But again, they're just really wanting everybody to be very smart in where they place that turf areas. And then this was that's where I moved that from here, but clarifying that residential developments shall not have more than 35% of the total combined area in the front and side yards landscaped with turf, grass, or lawn. So I did make a few other changes. This was the incorrect number. Now, that was what was allowed last year for cities to adopt. One of the things that came out of this last legislative session were some statewide standards. And so everyone who adopted this ordinance last year with those standards of 20% is going to have to go back and amend that to be 15% in order to be compliant or to be eligible for some of the funding that the state is setting aside to address turf removal. So, and then there were just a few other changes that I made. I'm taking good lesson from Commissioner Sundloff here and removing the redundancy of the threes and the parentheses. And so I did that in a couple areas where that was. And then also wanted to clarify down here that that we're talking about the building construction being completed and not just, construction of, I just felt like building would be appropriate. And again, there's the taking out that redundancy. So I also then in this section right down here wanted to just make sure that we knew, I started thinking about, okay, what is a third party service district? So really the intent with this is we don't want people to use their culinary water to water their landscaping. And so where there is irrigation that's provided by irrigation or secondary water, we have that in most every area of the city. There is the new development up above 89 Orchard, is it Orchard Fields or whatever that is called? They do not have access to secondary water at this time, and so we've had to work with them and put in some regulations for having that culinary water used for that landscaping. And then these are just general guidelines or regulations, no landscaping or no irrigating between 10 and 6 p.m. And obviously, anyone who's watering against the recommendations from the drought restrictions, we want to be able to enforce some of those. So that is a real quick overview of what we're proposing, and if there are any questions, comments, concerns, discussion, please go right ahead.
Go ahead, Paul.
I have a couple of kind of policy questions. When you said 700, that's a figure provided by Weber Basin
700, yes.
properties?
Yes, so
Are-
they have issued rebates to 700 different people
Is that-
throughout their entire
Okay,
district.
that was going to be my question. That's
Yeah.
not Kaysville, right? That's throughout their whole
No,
area?
that
Okay.
is, they cover 5 counties, that is throughout their entire district.
Okay.
There's been none in Kaysville, hence
Correct.
the
because-
implementation of their standards so that people can get that in Kaysville.
Correct, yes.
Thank you for answering that. Question number 2. This is where it gets a little fuzzy when you're doing text amendments. What about concrete? Does concrete count toward the 65%?
Hardscape?
Yeah, so I think that there is, I think that is funnessed out somewhere in here, because they're saying you would exclude the hardscaped from the landscaped area.
Okay.
Is that answering your question?
I think so, because what I'm thinking is I'm thinking of my own property.
Uh-huh.
And I've got a 3-car garage, and I paved some additional area for basketball hoop. And if I'm looking at my total front yard from one side of the property to the other, I might be able to qualify for the 35% if the paved area either counts toward the 100% or if you exclude it, because it makes a big difference. If I can't count it, then there's really no way. So I think you've answered my question.
Yeah, I think it is meant to be of the landscaped area.
Of the landscape.
And that the hardscape would be exclusive of the landscape
Okay.
area.
Well, that brings up my next concern then. In Kaysville, especially West Kaysville, where we have large lots, where I live in West Kaysville, my lot is 170 feet wide and about 150 feet deep. That's a really large front yard area, and even with a large driveway, it's really daunting. I really want to get rid of I water, as hard as I try with my landscaping sprinklers, you do water concrete a lot. And so I'd love to flip my strip, but I don't see how that can happen. I have a 55-foot side yard. And then that brings up the next question, which is tied into this one. The calculation is, what is the side yard? Is the side yard the front yard out to the street along the whole, in other words, do you take the side yard count to the back of the house or to the front of the house? Because without knowing that, you have a huge area that may count against your ability to do that. If Again, with a large, deep lot and a 55-foot yard side yard, you see the dilemma I've got?
Yes.
If it's the area that's just in front of the house to the street, and my side yard is just that 30 feet that goes over to the side property line with my neighbor, that's a lot easier to get to that 35% possibility. But if side yard includes the area from the front of the house to the back of the house, or without further definition, all the way to the back fence, there's no way. So how you define that and calculate that area is super critical.
So we do have a definition for side yard, and then again, I apologize, like, this is where I need it close up and not far away. So this is our definition of a side yard. So from the front yard to the rear yard, between the building and the nearest
Yeah.
side lot. So
Yeah.
I think we would just go off of that definition.
Yeah,
I should also note, and you guys are getting like the early bird special here of what's going to go on. So the state, through this legislation that was passed this last session, there is going to be a broader turf removal program that'll be coming forward that'll be for people who want to remove more than just their park strip. And that program won't be rolled out until later this year or maybe early next year.
yeah.
But the reimbursement for that, there will be $1.50 coming from the state, and then Weaver Basin will contribute an equal amount. And so for a full-on turf removal program, you could get a rebate up to, to $3 per square foot for people who do want to take out additional lands or additional turf.
Yeah.
How they are going to implement this program is that once they have that $3 reimbursement in place, you'll only be allowed to apply once. But if you've already done, you're one of the 700 people who have already completed a project, they would allow those individuals to come back and do the additional turf removal program for that $3. But once they're to a point where they're just going to have one program, it's a one shot with however much turf you want to remove, and that $3 per square foot.
That's quite liberal. I know Las Vegas has been doing $1 a square foot for some time. I mean, obviously, they're a little more water constricted than we are. But again, from a calculation and a policy perspective, I have a hard time seeing that in large lot West Kaysville, we're going to have very many people be able to qualify to flip their strip when the calculation's going to be so daunting to get there.
Yeah, so this,
I'm not being critical, just
yeah,
realistic.
So this would allow for people to do the flip their strip through the end of the time that Weaver Basin decides to discontinue and combine the program to the whole turf removal. And so, again, everybody who adopted an ordinance previously, in order to be eligible for that $3 a square foot, is going to have to go back and adopt these new regulations in order to allow their residents to be eligible.
Yeah.
But that may be only after this fall, or it might be, 2024 before they get that program completely set up.
Well, we're moving in the right direction. I applaud the effort. I just see the practical obstacles.
I think we might don't we have a public hearing?
We do, but I mean, is there any other
We could-
questions for staff before?
Because I can bring it up after that. I
Yeah,
have a
I think
comment
that's
to
probably
that.
better if we do that in that order. Do we have we'll open the public hearing. Do we have anybody that would like to speak to this item? Okay, come on up. If you make sure you please state your name.
Like Montgomery, I'm just more curious on this, talking about, the flip the strip thing, and I don't know if this is the place to ask her that people have the knowledge, but people that in the community have already flipped the strip, but, took that into account before doing it, does that apply to them? Okay.
Okay, good question, though. Anybody else like to speak to this? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Josh, you can ask your question.
Yeah, I just want to maybe clarify in my own mind. I'm not sure if this is what you were asking, Paul, but My understanding with the flip the strip, if these standards get implemented and we then qualify as a city the Weaver Basin would sort of allow our citizens to do that, be eligible. Let's take your property or just some property that's in clear violation of what these standards will be. They can come in and replace all the turf in their park strip with, xeriscaping and not touch any other component not have to touch, not be required to remodel, remove turf, whatever, in any other portion of their property. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this would be applicable, where is our applicability section? So this would be applicable to all new landscaping in all new zones. I think I'm answering your question here. Or then if an existing property is going to modify landscape more than 50%, then, and I'm seeing another one of our things where we can change here. But then that would be eligible, or that would be applicable to properties that were going through some type of a landscape renovation of more than 50% of what currently exists.
Yeah, so if it was,
Does that answer your question?
well, if it was just the strip, presumably that's going to be less than 50% of the landscape area. And it's not, there's a whole lot of things that I have, comments I have, but this is an example of one of them. All new landscapes, what does that mean? Because if you're replacing landscape within the strip, that's new landscape. Does new landscape mean the whole property? Does it mean a newly constructed residential home, single family, and that's a new landscape? What is a new landscape? I presume that's what it means, is you're building a home and...
Yes, it's meant to be new development. So we get a building permit application, and it does go into a little bit more detail further on in the ordinance, but they would be required to submit a landscaping plan for that new development. And then we would look at that and make sure that no more than 30% was shown to be turf in the areas where it's restricted for that. And then if it was to be anything outside of residential, we would look at that 15%. We'd make sure that if there's a designated turf or active recreation area, that would be accepted. So it is meant to be new landscapes with construction of any new residential home, commercial, industrial structure, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So does that make that, and we could state that more clearly.
No, I think that's fine. I guess, Paul, were you saying, again, if we just use your home as an example,
Yeah.
let's just say your home is in violation of the 35% requirement in the front and side yard, you would still be able to flip your strip.
Oh, I can flip my strip anytime I want.
No. You would still be able to flip your strip and get credit from Weaver Basin Water. You'd get the money from it and leave the rest of your landscape untouched on the back, from the back of your sidewalk to the back of your property.
Well, that's not how I read it.
That's what this is saying. That's what I'm saying.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that would be true.
You wouldn't
until
have to do that because you're not modifying more than 50% of your landscaping.
But I don't meet the minimum qualification.
Well,
I don't meet the 35%. of
You don't
the
have
side
to.
yard.
You don't have to because you're not modifying 50% of your property, of your landscape.
right, and so I think this gets into where, as Weaver Basin
I hope you're right.
rolls out their program, right now, you can just flip your strip. But
Right.
going forward, I don't think they're gonna give you $3 a square foot to flip your strip. You're gonna have to get really into removing a lot of turf before they're gonna give you the $3 reimbursement. So, this is the requirement that they are asking us to put in place in order for that eligibility. How they administer their program and the exact specifics of that really is something that, I can speak to based on the conversations I've had with them, but once they reach that trigger point of going from the flip your strip to the turf removal program, then I don't think they're gonna reimburse you for just flipping your strip. They're gonna want people to be more aggressive.
But up until that point, they wouldn't be required, Paul, let's just use Paul. Paul's the guinea pig.
No, that's fine. I want to understand this. That's,
Anybody who, up until that point where they require more turf removal, which might be the 35% or whatever worst standard they're requiring of us. Someone can remove their strip. So we pass this ordinance as currently drafted, hypothetically. Someone then we're eligible, citizens are eligible to get the strip flipped and get money for it. Then someone goes out and says, I want to replace my strip and get the money, but I like the rest of my grass. I don't want to go that far. Someone hypothetically might say that. That person wouldn't have to do that. We wouldn't have to touch any of their grass until Weaver Basin really makes this drastic change.
Correct.
So from now until that point, you can flip your strip, get money for it, and not have to touch the rest of your property. That's what this is saying.
Without meeting the
Yes.
percentage qualification?
Yes.
That's my understanding of how Weaver Basin wants to administer this.
Okay.
Is there a way we can get clarity on that? Because I read it how Paul reads it. Like, you do all that work, you incentive, you give these, well, assuming funds are available up until April 15th of next year, so assuming the funds aren't depleted by that point, there's a lot of hard work that you've done to like do this, but I would want to make sure we had clarity around what exactly.
So the clarity is going to come through however Weaver Basin administers their program. They have a lot of strict, I mean, you have to take a class, you have to have a notarized document recorded against your property saying that you're not going to revert back to putting grass in your park strip. So, and I think there's obviously crossover between what this ordinance is trying to help us be eligible for and then a program that we have no say in administering in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, candidly, also, I want to get this approved as quickly as possible. I'd hate to delay this just because we don't have some information on how Weaver Basin administers their program. City Council is only going to have one meeting in April, and if we don't get this to them on April 13th, we're now looking at May, and that is really getting, I think, late into the season to get something like this adopted. So Weaver Basin has all the information on their website as to how they administer that. I think that there has been some changes over, how they've been administering this since inception until now. But really, what we're here is to say, look, Weaver Basin came, sent another letter out and said, hey, here's the few things that you have to have in place in order for your residents to be eligible.
Yeah.
Above and beyond that, how they regulate the program and the people that are eligible. Really, it's not our money. It's not anything that I can really speak to, aside from the conversations that I've had with them.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would just like to say thanks for proposing this, because I know I had several neighbors ask me, like, why can't we be eligible for the flip to strip, And so to be able to make it possible, I think that's great. So, yeah, I have no reservations. I would recommend that we just move forward as is, just so that we can give our residents that opportunity to do this. And then, like you said, Basin will be, they're the ones that will administer this, so they'll have to answer all the questions that are being asked right now, so.
Yeah, and I, in conversations with Weaver Basin staff, Assistant District Manager John Perry, who is supervising everybody who's over this program, what he has said is that they want to push as much of this as they can. Last year, thankfully, we were finally able to capture the public's attention about how flagrant we have used our water. And, and it's concerning. I've actually heard stuff on the news and people, that are thinking like, hey, with this great winter season that we had, we're really going to be so much better off. And while that is true, that is absolutely not true. Mm-hmm. And so, Weaver Basin wants to be as aggressive as they can. If the $1 million that they've set apart for this year is used up, I think they'll try and figure out how to fund more of these programs, because it's critical to our future of having water and being smart in using that water. And landscaping isn't the smartest use, especially when, there's a house in the neighborhood behind me who we have some super weird easements that run through, and so they probably have like 100-foot setback of their house. They're gonna put all grass in, and it just, every time I walk past it, I just think, wow, that is the wrong decision. It's not something, I mean, my husband and I are gonna be doing our Flip the Strip program this year, and we wanna take out additional turf as well, because it's the right thing to do, at least in our minds. And so this will give that opportunity for people who do wanna have a financial incentive to be eligible for that. And I think that Weber Basin really does want to try and encourage this as much as possible, and so does the state, which is why they've set apart all this funding. The funding does have to go through all of the water conservation districts that exist. If there are areas that don't have the water conservation districts, then they're having to figure out another method of putting this money into the hands of people who want to remove the turf. But again, this is all really up to Weber Basin as to how they run their program.
In your conversations, Melinda, with Weber Basin, have they given any like outcomes, information, like in terms of how many of the 700, or how many applied and how, like what percentage actually qualified?
Yeah, so of those, like, so he told me they have 14,000 applications that they've been processing and 700 have been completed. So some of those, like, we're one of those 700 that hasn't been completed because we started last fall. They are requiring that you take a class. All the classes were full. They've now implemented an online class that you can take, so people don't have to go all the way out to the district to take that class. So there may be some of those 700 that are in queue that maybe never finish their project. Maybe they get in queue and realize that the requirements and the kind of return on investment on that isn't worth it for them. Our property, I mean, sounds like we're kind of like Commissioner Allred here, but we're on a corner. We're a half-acre lot. We have a lot of park strip, and so it makes financial sense for us. There may be others. I look at other homes, and I don't think I would bother with going up to Weber Basin, taking a class, and signing a document and having it go recorded against our property for 40 feet of park strip when you take out all of the drive approach and stuff. So I think that's also why they're looking to further incentivize with getting that overall turf removal program set up through the state. So there was another thing that I wanted to say. I should have brought my notebook in here, but I think he said that right now they have, do you want to go grab my green notebook so I can make sure I give the correct data? But I think he said that everything that they have, all the turf that they've had removed so far, I want to say it was 14 acre feet, or maybe it was 5 acres of turf. I'll confirm that when Minnie comes back with my notebook. But it's certainly a dent, a pretty good dent, and we're headed in the right direction.
Can I, just for clarification, I'm going to quickly walk through how I see it applying what I was saying. So 17.5.2 says, the provisions of this chapter apply to 2 scenarios on the screen. And I'm going to summarize. The first scenario is any new landscape, if it's a new construction, any new landscape associated with new construction, whether that's commercial, residential, industrial, whatever. So that's number 1. Number 2 is if there's a residential, commercial, industrial, mixed-use project where you're changing the existing landscaping more than 50%. If you're not doing either of those things, the provisions of this code do not apply.
Yes.
So presumably any park strip, unless this is a massive park strip and it's really long and there's not a lot of landscaping elsewhere on the property, any park strip is not going to, replacing the park strip is not going to rise to the level of 50%. And therefore, the rest of this code does not apply to someone who goes in and just flips their strip.
Sure.
However, that person is still most likely going to be eligible, if this passes, for the rebates from Weber Basin until the Weber Basin implements a much more restrictive or broad turf removal program.
Yeah, that's yes, exactly how I would interpret that. So right now, their flip the strip is $1.25 a square foot. My notes here, let me just look through. That they have 15 acres committed to be removed, 15 acres of turf. So that's a lot of park strips. Doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're just looking at little park strips, that's a
And,
lot.
When I think of like park strips, there is very, very inefficient to water too. So you're using a lot more water to water a park strip than you would water other areas, you know, so.
Let me just look through here, so. Receivers, 14,000 applications that have been in queue, 700 completed. So there are 700 that have started and not completed the process. Like I said, you know, my husband really prefers to attend things in person, and so he was waiting for an in-person class to open up. Let's see. So I think, yeah, the rest of my notes were just what we had to have in the ordinance. So it's just interesting to note, but, you know, you look at like, how come we had all of these watering restrictions and other places south of here didn't have watering restrictions the way we had? And Weaver Basin really only has about a 2-year supply of water with all of our reservoirs, and other water districts have the ability to supply or to hold a lot more water, like a 7-year supply of water. And so that's really where we only have a 2-year supply with all of our reservoirs. You know, again, like going back to, people are like, oh wow, the drought's, you know, over. We had such a great year. That's really not, like they posted on their social media, you know, like Pineview is only 45% full. So we really still have a far way to go with all of this, and you know, and this is a great start to get where we need to be with at least our residents being happier, the ability for them to participate.
There need to be PSAs all over the freeways saying, drought's not over, snowpack's great, reservoirs aren't.
Yeah, and, you know, and it's like, I even said to my husband the other night, like, I hate that they're saying all this on the news, because it makes it sound like we're in the clear. You know, they're talking about how now, you know, before this winter, how much of the state was in an extreme drought, and now we're not, but really this is, you know, they've said that we'd have to have 6 more seasons of snowfall like this to completely get us where we should be with the Great Salt Lake, with all of our reservoirs. So every little bit that we can put in will help.
I do find something that's a little bit ironic, though, in this new chapter. The way I read it, under 1752, just piggyback a little bit on what Josh was saying. If you look at B, B is like a safe harbor for people who want to keep using a lot of water.
Sure.
Think about it. It's a disincentive to change your landscape. We need to move to the next level eventually that goes, we need to encourage, find ways to get people, because you can hide in that and say, I'm only changing 48%, 35%, 29%. So these rules don't apply to me. And so I view that as somewhat as from a policy perspective, as problematic by saying, well, I can change up to half my landscaping before these new rules are applicable to me. The flip the strip thing is minor. Reviewing, Josh, I think I agree with you after having looked at it again. If I look at Weber Basin's letter, it's specifically talking about new development. It doesn't say anything about existing, except we're going to provide money, but it doesn't provide any definition for it. So my neighbor across the street flipped their strip. I think it cost them about $2,000. And they just, well, no, it didn't. They did it on their own and saved about $2,000 is what they told us. They had a bid and they did it themselves. They got 3, 4 teenage boys and they all got out there and did it in a weekend. And it looks great. But anyway, I do think this is a move in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, and there are like, if you just want to come in and completely rock your strip, that's not what Weaver Basin is going to approve. They want drip planters, they want water-wise plants every 10 feet, but not more than 50% of the project. So they do have some additional regulations that people may not want to. In fact, I was talking to a resident earlier this week who's looking to do that, and he's like, oh, I don't want anything in there. I just want to put rocks, so I don't care to go get reimbursed.
Well, that's what my neighbor did. There are no plants in there. It's just pumice.
Yeah. You know, and I suppose we could take this whole section out, but then there's no incentive at all for anybody
Yeah.
there's no trigger. Or we could change that. This is not anything that Weaver Basin has.
Yeah, this is us, right?
Required, this is
Yeah.
us. So
Yeah.
if you want to say 40%, we can say 40, or if you want to say 30%, we can recommend to the city council whatever percent you're comfortable with.
Yeah. I'm just pointing out the irony of
It
it.
is ironic,
Yeah.
don't you think?
We're trying to save water, but we're providing a safe haven if you don't want to save water.
Right.
I like the irony of it, though, because it allows that freedom of choice, and that people can, if they have a desire to put all rocks, or to abide by this, or get incentivized or disincentivized, that they can choose.
Just to piggyback on that comment, I have mixed feelings about all of this, but I have heartburn about a fair amount of it. And as a quick background as to partly why I might have some of the heartburn I have, and this doesn't really affect our decision today or the words on the page here, so to speak, but there is a lot of things that citizens can do, cities can do with commercial landscaping, for example, residential landscaping. Those are all going to help in the effort to not use as much water, get water into the Great Salt Lake, whatever. But literally and figuratively, those changes, as good as they could be, are a drop in the bucket to the changes that need to happen in other areas of the state, primarily agriculture, which is like 1 or 3% at the most, something like that. I think it's like something like 1% of the state's economy, but uses like 80% of the water we're talking about. And so here we are parsing and restricting freedom, to Krista's point, in my opinion, all these things for a drop in the bucket. And so I think in my opinion, we need to do some things. Yes, I agree, we can do some things, but there has to be a balance. And I think some of the things, at least in my reading of this, go a little too far. And so specifically, any violation of this, and any violation of the zoning ordinances or any city code for that matter, but particularly Chapter 17, or Title 17, any violation of Title 17, I looked this up before I came just to confirm, to the last section of this, it says enforcement penalties, right? The community development director or their designee shall be authorized to enforce all provisions of this chapter in accordance with the municipal code. What is the enforcement mechanism? What's the penalty is the question. I looked it up. Any violation of, and Melinda, you can correct me if I'm wrong, any violation of Title 17 is a Class C misdemeanor. Now, that obviously would have prosecutorial discretion and a whole lot of layers before it ever got to that point. I recognize that. But nevertheless, that is the violation, or that is the penalty for violating anything in Title 17, including this. So if somebody's neighbor is a Karen and wants to turn them in and they're watering their lawn at 10:30 a.m., they have arguably violated this code as it's proposed to be written. Or if this is a very subjective standard, if someone isn't, quote, maintaining a well cared for landscape that enhances the appearance of the property, that's totally subjective. They would be arguably guilty of a Class C misdemeanor. So these are all good things, but are we going too far on some things, and are we restricting that choice that sort of Krista was talking about? I think we are, and it's totally a tough balancing act. I mean, I have notes and all kinds of stuff, but that's kind of what's just in my mind as I read through some of these things. And as I've said in many times before, not just us, ultimately it's going to be city council. They're going to pass this in the dark of night with, 10 people in the room, and then all 30,000 of Kaysville citizens are going to be scratching their head when this lands on their doorstep and they're saying, excuse me, why did we ever do that, right? We have to keep those people in mind when we think about this, rather than what we think is best or what we think is right. And maybe in some respects it should be done that way, but we have to think that there's a whole lot of people here who would probably have a different opinion, and is this the right, every nook and cranny of this proposal, is this the right way to go about it? So without jumping into details, that's in my mind.
So, excellent points. You're not wrong. Yes, Class C misdemeanor. And our enforcement process does go back to people who submit complaints. We do not go out and look for code enforcement complaints to handle those. We just don't have the staff and resources to do that. So to answer your question though, I think this would go back to our other chapter where we talk about weeds can't be more than 8 inches tall. So that would be the trigger. I mean, you're correct, that's a very subjective sentence and well cared for that enhances the appearance of the property. But then we would go back to that other code that says, we don't allow weeds more than 8 inches. I also have trepidation about implementing this ordinance and our ability to keep up with complaints if they come in. That was my biggest reason when we talked last year with the council about, I recommended against putting an ordinance like this in place because those requirements we were basing wanted us to put in were so, it was like 10 pages of stuff, very specific about like where you can put drip versus overhead spray and all types of details. So this is pared down quite a bit. But there may be some instances, right? I mean, we're not going to go out and look for these violations. If they come to us, we will deal with them as we can. Weaver Basin also has some ability to leverage fines against people who are misappropriately or inappropriately using water. And that may be even a better route to go because our process would be a lengthy one. I mean, we had a weed enforcement case where we started asking someone last summer to mow their weeds. They never did. Snow fell. Finally, we filed charges against them. And that has, we had to serve those individuals that owned the property with the charges. That's not the right word, but anyway, it is a lengthy process and we have to have a lot of documentation before we go to that point. Our hope is always to just get voluntary compliance where if we help educate a resident that doesn't know that you're not supposed to water between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Between 10 a.m. Yeah. So a lot of times people don't know. And once they know, they're like, okay, we'll gladly comply. Other times you have people that just don't care. And then we have to do a lot more work in documenting and taking those cases to screening with the city attorney to see if that's something that we want to proceed or pursue. But it would all be based on complaint.
Couple of thoughts. We're in a brave new world with water and drought. I think what's happening really positively around the state is, one, the legislature is providing money for metering. And so as we meter, a lot of this is going to self-correct, right? Because a lot of the water wasters are going to end up paying like crazy for the water that they're using. I've got neighbors, remain nameless, but because of this type of soil they have, they water pretty much every night for the last over 20 years, 25 years, quarter century. Because they're like, well, I have a lot of clay, and so I need to water a lot. Well, I have a lot of sand, different, 1 yard away. My point being is that metering is the big step forward. And as we go forward, it's going to help correct this quite a bit. And then also, as we become more and more water restricted over time, unless we have many years of heavy snows, I think people are going to take the metering and the cost of the water, because we have super cheap water in Utah, cheapest in the country, I believe, one of the cheapest in the West. And even though residential water is only 10% of all the water we use along the Wasatch Front, 10%, still 10%. But as the cost goes up to water those plants and those yards, people are going to start taking their yards out. And you'll see more and more businesses come in that do the Las Vegas kind and the St. George, that kind of stuff. It's going to naturally evolve, I think. So in some ways, I look at these rules and I go, we can get lost in, we get lost in the minutia, but the big picture is, I think a lot of people want to do the right thing, and if this ordinance helps us do that, I say, great, we should support it. But I just think there's some flaws in here that we ought to think about. So I don't know how we forward this, but I think Josh has helped clarify. I appreciate him looking at this. I still think it could be clearer from Weaver Basin on existing properties like mine. I would love to flip my strip.
I'll just make two really try to be concrete comments, and then I won't say anything more. The only, as I read this, so my previous explanation of which properties this applies to stands. 17.510 is the only one that I read that applies standards to all properties. So everything except for 17.510, as I read it, only applies to the two categories I went through earlier. But 17.510, the standards in that one apply to all properties. And that's where I think maybe we've gone too far, especially 17.510A, using culinary water for irrigation where irrigation water is provided by a third-party service district, or as Melinda amended it, irrigation or secondary water. So just hypothetically, when Grandma Betty goes out to her front yard and there's a brown spot in her grass, and she hooks a hose up to the hose bib that is culinary water and starts watering that brown spot, she's violated that, and that's a Class C misdemeanor. I mean, granted, as I already said, there's a whole process and it probably would never get to that level, but just on the reading of it, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're saying if we pass this.
We already have that in city code in our chapter, let's see, Title 9, Chapter 4, our water code already lists that. This is just,
So Grandma Betty can't water her can't use her culinary water to water the brown spot?
well, no, and that's the whole thing, right? Like, people, they want to start watering in March, but the secondary water doesn't come on until April 15th, or they turned it off on September 15th because the reservoirs are depleted. And now somebody wants to keep their lawn green from September 15th until November 15th.
Or they don't have a secondary connection on, there's that side of the property.
So if they do not have a secondary water connection, this would not apply to them.
And Melinda, let me interject. I mean, what happens when you start using culinary is, and I've seen this happen in the city of Clinton, you sometimes have people that then set up a secondary attachment to run through or a culinary for their secondary. And this actually happened in Clinton, and then it backflowed into the culinary, and they ended up having to make it so that all of Clinton City had to then were without water for weeks because they had to rechlorinate. So there is a logic, because it becomes a public health threat when this happens, because people think, oh, I'll just start using the culinary for my secondary. So I mean, there are some reasons why.
Yes.
It's not just for that little brown spot on my lawn.
And that's where we had to work last year with Orchard Ridge to ensure that they put those backflow preventers on all of their irrigation, that that it wasn't going to cause those types of problems. And so we had to work through the standards on those connections and, you know, that was Public Works working with them. But, so we already have that in here right now, just in a different chapter. But, you know, wanting to have everything kind of all in one spot, we've duplicated that here in the Waterwise chapter.
Yeah, I could just go all day on that, but I won't. So the last thing I'll say is, I think we should beef up, if we're going to do this, the landscape standards maybe have gone a little too far, and the irrigation standards have maybe not gone far enough. And what I think, where you can really, the landscape standards seem to be a little more subjective, and you can really get objective standards with irrigation. And as an example of what I'm talking about, there was a part that basically said, you know, if you, I can't find it right offhand. Oh, here we go. This is 1755B2. Water conserving plants, this is in park strips, water conserving plants not requiring overhead spray irrigation may be planted in park strips subject to clear view regulations. To my knowledge, landscape contractors, landscape architects, whatever, there's no, in that industry, there's nothing that says, okay, this type of shrub or tree or plant requires overhead spray, this one requires drip. That's not a thing. So what I think we're trying to get at there is we're trying to say, let's use only the water that needs to be used for the particular application. And you can really narrow that in with sort of a very robust irrigation plan requirements about how much water can be placed in any given, you know, zone. If we're going to be requiring landscape and irrigation plans, which we are by 1757, let's have very defined standards about how much water can be applied to every given zone or on every valve. Because drip irrigation, while good, and sometimes you actually use more water with drip because you don't see it. You could drive down the street and everyone in the city could have their drip irrigation valves open and flowing between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., violating this code, but the water's just flowing. You can't see it. So drip isn't a cure-all for solving water problems. A mismanaged drip irrigation system can be worse than an overhead spray one because Karen can't see it. She can't go turn it in. She can see the one spraying while it's raining or, you know, at 3 in the afternoon, but she can't see the drip going. So I think what I would like to see is a lot more, and there's other cities, I think West Jordan or West Valley comes to mind, that has very good irrigation standards that really get at how much water are we using. Only use the amount of water needed for the particular landscape application, not just restrict the landscape and no matter how much water goes on there. Sure, the landscape looks good, but if you're misusing the water, it defeats the whole purpose. So really refine the irrigation standards and make them objective and restrict how much water can be used if we're going to do this would be probably one of my main suggestions.
How do you do that when you don't have meters on every residence?
Well, you can, that's a good point. Until you get that, you can do some things. That would be the ideal. You can do some things. You can require, on the irrigation plan that gets submitted pursuant to 1757, you can, this is where West Jordan or West Valley City, I think, requires this. And it was very expensive as a landscape architect to go through and recreate this table that you have to put on your irrigation plan for commercial properties or even residential is what we'd be doing here. It's very time consuming, but it was meeting their standard to go on and say, okay, for this valve on this irrigation system is going to water, you know, this shrub area. And the owner must only water X, you know, number of X precipitation rate or X number of hours or put X quantity of water on or something like that you required on the landscape plan. And then the city reviews it and says, yes, that meets our standard. And then if for some reason it's violating that, they would go back and they say, hey, you are only allowed to do what was approved on your irrigation plan. right? I mean, that's a way to do it. I'm not saying that's the right way or the best way. I'm just saying there is ways to do it short of metering.
I mean, I guess where I'm at is like, I think that the way it's written right now is teaching would like portray like correct principles. Like using drip irrigation, I think is a good change. So yeah, it could be used incorrectly and you won't be able to maybe see it as well. But if people change to drip irrigation and they use it properly, that would be a good change. And so I don't see, I mean, I think that that's what this is portraying. And I think in the absence of being able to measure it right now, why not approve this right now? This, I think, is a good change.
Yeah, so really, this is, I think, the bare minimum of what we can do, but based on our staffing, our resources, and also based on the sentiment that the council has had the last couple of years when this has been put in front of them, if we go any more robust than this, I don't think it'll make it through. And so this is kind of the low-hanging fruit, what we can do right now. I think over the next few years, the state's going to be coming through with, you know, more regulations on this that we may have to adopt into our own ordinance, but this is a good start. And I think that this, as presented, is something that we can get at least 3 of the 5 on board with.
I have a couple of questions. Good discussion. First question. How time sensitive is this ordinance?
Well, I mean, it's important to get it right. So.
That's the basis of my
Weather,
question.
right? So my hope was that we could get this in front of, we only have one city council meeting in April on the 13th. If we don't get this to them on the 13th, then the next crack that we have would be in May. The next crack we would have would be May 4th.
Let me clarify my question.
So,
We have a proposed ordinance, a lot of good stuff in it, but I think there's a lot of clarification and maybe some work that still needs to be done. If the staff is feeling a lot of pressure from the council or from wherever to get this done, then question number 2 would be, is perfect the enemy of good? In other words, is this good, or are we trying to get it really good and as close to perfect? Is this an effort to make Weber Basin happy? In other words, are we trying to get this on the books so we can have a whole bunch of people apply for Flip the Strip? Because your staff report said we've had a lot of people ask.
few
this
dozen.
is an effort to give an opportunity to all the people who were mad at us last year for not being eligible. I don't think, I mean, Weber Basin cares, but not as much as those of us who sat through however many emails and phone calls and people that came in and were just mad that they're not eligible.
Oh.
So this is to appease them. It's not anything, I don't care whether or not Weber Basin
Okay.
is happy.
Okay, so let me have a
So-
follow-up question then. A follow-up question is there a reason we need to adopt this at all instead of just sending them to Weber Basin?
Weber Basin will not.
Unless we have an ordinance.
Unless we have this in
Right.
place.
That, okay,
contingent.
that's what I'm trying to get at. That's what I'm trying to get at. So in other words, this really is somewhat at the behest of Weber Basin. Because people can't get Flip the Strip unless the city has an ordinance in place.
Right.
So there is pressure.
Right, and so last year what ended up happening, and I finally had a very candid conversation with them, was they were putting the city council between the residents and them. And so everybody who called Weber Basin said, well, go talk to your city council members because Kaysville isn't eligible because they haven't adopted an ordinance.
Okay.
And so then they come and talk to us, they did come talk to the city council, but it really created this rub where Weber Basin was, and it's just how it works, right? Because they don't have the ability to adopt an ordinance for a community. They have to rely on the community to adopt the ordinance, but they drew a line in the sand that said if a community is not going to protect our water from new construction going forward, we are not going to give them any money
Okay.
to allow
Okay.
them to participate. So this really is, it's directed towards giving residents what I think that they want based on all of the feedback that we had last year, although we had a water conservation event, and it was very poorly attended. But that said, you know, we probably had well over 100 or more.
10 to 15 per week.
Yeah, people that were upset that we were not eligible.
Okay.
And so this is to get them eligible and to meet the requirements that Weaver Basin has in place for them to be eligible.
Okay. My inclination before all the questions was to make a motion that we table this for a little more refining, to answer some of the questions and get some of the, you know, but it sounds to me like,
If we do, we're not going to get it
Yep.
to the council by the 13th.
yep, so that was where I was headed, is to say, when there's this much discussion, usually it means there's a lot of flaws and there's still some work to do, and we ask staff to bring it back. And I know that you've got heavy workloads, but it's imperfect, but you know, better to send something forward that's imperfect and perhaps confusing to some than to not have something on the books to allow for a better good to happen.
Sure, and if you want to make a conditional recommendation based on, you know, going and looking at refining some of those things that we've talked about, I'm happy to do that and take a better crafted ordinance going forward. But I do have a concern about the timing and trying to get this in front of people when the, you know, I mean, April 15th is when that water gets turned on. So
Yep.
we do want to, there is a sense of urgency with that. And whether or not that outweighs getting it absolutely right, you know, a lot of times we have deficiencies in the ordinance that we don't really know or understand until we put them to practice.
Yeah.
This draft ordinance was based on a couple different cities that put theirs in place last year, and I tried to combine the simplest of those, and this is the best I could come up with.
I applaud the effort.
Yeah, well, but again, it's the planning commission's prerogative, so if you feel it's more important to go back and refine and bring this back, then that's what we'll do.
I mean, as the chair, I would recommend that we go forward. I mean, I think that, this is exactly what happened last year. We're exactly the same point, and we tabled it last year, and now we're here now. So I think that what we have before us is good enough. I think that would be my recommendation, so.
I'm wondering if, because basically the only things that be pertinent to those that already live here, that they're not part, what is it, A and B of 1752, if we just figured out something with this 17.5-10, because those are the only ones. My concern is if we push this forward and then we want to change it later, it's going to be pretty challenging in terms of going through each step. But if those are the ones that, if we, depending on who your neighbor may or may not be, I may have personal experience in this regard, I don't feel comfortable with all those provisions under 17.510. And my other point is, we look at all the House bills, well, House Bill 121 from last year and those this year. I'm just curious if we're getting caught in the weeds a little bit from legislatively, like Utah-wide. We look at how alfalfa and hay soak up about 2/3 of Utah's water. Utah's most valuable agricultural crop, with nearly $500 million in 2022, comes from alfalfa, and 29% of that is exported overseas, with 2/3 of that going to China. This flip to strip is, I could see some return on investment for some homeowners, but I think we just be cautious of not just bowing to those that say this is what you should do while they're not looking at the bigger picture. And I know we spoke to that a little bit earlier, but I think if we just, at least if anything, just kind of clean up that last, 17.510, then moving forward, if we did need to go back and whatever that may be, I know your workload is already huge, Melinda and Mindy, but that I'd feel more confident in that regard.
So I think it does make sense, at least on this section, to clarify that, right, the applicability at the very beginning of the chapter then doesn't necessarily match to what this would be applicable to all existing residents. So as I said, this is already, all three of these are already in place. We could certainly take that out if that's a concern, but
Yeah.
people need to be smarter with water, and you might live next door to someone who cares and you might not, but I think we have to start with something.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at. It's like, I look at those 4 items right there, and they seem common sense to me. I mean, if we do not prove something like that, I think the message is that we don't care about water conservation. That's what we're saying, essentially. I mean, I don't know how else you can take that. So I would say that I'm fine with the items as they are right now in that paragraph.
I'd like to make a couple of suggestions in the form of a motion. Unless there's more discussion, I don't want to cut off further discussion. But okay, I'll make a motion that we recommend approval to the city council. Wait, we had our public hearing?
Yes.
Last time I jumped ahead of that. I'll make a recommendation, a motion that we recommend approval of this draft ordinance with a couple of suggestions for the planning commission to attach to the draft for consideration. And I'll ask the planning commission to weigh in on my suggestions. First one would be expand the purpose section. The purpose is in the ordinance, but it is not something that can actually be used as a tool. But the purpose section could have a little bit more a little more detail about what's going on here. So I'd recommend that there just be a little bit more about what's in the body of the ordinance put in there, specifically in terms of what is trying to be accomplished. I would also recommend or suggest that one of the most important provisions is 17.510. 17.510, if we want to make this have a little more bite, move that closer to the top. Move that up front and say, this is what's prohibited. In other words, here's the purpose, what we're trying to do, here's what is not okay, and then so number 2 is do that. Number 3, definitions really should not be within this section. They should be in the definitions section. So that would shorten this. Move those definitions and make a reference to definitions, okay, under applicability or whatever heading you want. Say see definitions in the code. But generally speaking, you don't need to have those definitions in here. You can leave them if you want, but in terms of the ordinance, it's better to put those in the definition section. And then if there could be a clarification, so this is number 4. Fourth suggestion would be in terms of general standards, we could use some clarification on how the areas are calculated based on our previous discussion, side yard, because I think, again, well, we're trying to do a couple of things here. We're trying to qualify to get to flip the strip, and we kind of have to have those numbers in there, but it's still a little bit confusing about how you calculate. Could there be some clarification about how to calculate that? Because it does say to the back of the house. In this case, it might be helpful if you just say the front yard, side to side, from the front of the house up. Does Weber Basin requires it to the back of the house? Can you look into that? So that'd be suggestion number 4.
You just took this from Weber Basins, didn't you, Melinda? This is what Weber
Yes,
Basin
some of
says.
it, yeah. So I think the definitions were exactly from what Weaver Basin was
Yeah.
putting
Okay.
forward. I know I pulled a lot of this from West Bountifuls because they adopted a very simple ordinance. I think I also looked at Centerville's, Clearfield, Layton, they adopted much more.
Okay. Then let
grandiose.
me make a separate suggestion that might be even better. Instead of clarifying the wording, could you design a graphic? Could you put a graphic in there that shows a typical lot and the area that you would use to calculate? That would help people because a picture says 1,000 words, right? So instead of me or anybody else being confused about what it means, have a little drawing and shade those areas that are used for calculation, okay? And then other than that, the order you've got things, you've got some really good stuff in here about percentages and stuff that I'm sure is taken from the boilerplate or the model code or the restrictions that they're allowing. But I think there's a lot of detail in here that's probably over the top. Like Josh was saying, when you have, you have controllers and this and that and the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, every ordinance has that, but that's pretty much how everybody does their system anyway. So those are the 4 or 5 things. Did we get a note of those? And I'm open to any other suggestions from the commission, but if that's my motion.
I will cheerfully second it.
So the motion, expand the purpose section, move 1710, I think that, or 17510, I think that's a great idea. In fact, as you were saying that, I was thinking that. So look at putting the definitions into our general definition section, and then consider adding in a graphic, but then you also had, so how areas were calculated, but consider adding in a graphic to explain that.
Or in place of. In other words, you can leave the calculations there if that's language you're just transferring from Weaver Basin, but add a graphic.
Okay.
That would help everyone understand what that is. Because me and Josh are going back and forth, and, it should be easier than that. And many ordinances have simple graphics, super easy to use. I think that was it. I think 4 and 5 are kind of the same thing.
Okay.
So I think it's really
That
just
would be
4.
really good to have a graphic, I think.
Okay. That's my motion.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion for approval in a second with the conditions that, or additions that have been proposed. We'll start the voting with, sorry, I keep track of where we're at. Start voting with Commissioner Lyons.
Aye.
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 I'm going to vote nay, really quick, explain why. In general, I'm in favor of the principle of conserving water, but I think as it's drafted, it goes too far in too many ways, and it needs more refining. What I would have voted yes for is an ordinance that only says, let's just meet the requirements of Weaver Basin water so that people can qualify for flip the strip. That would be like 10% of this ordinance as I understand it. The rest needs refining, so nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it passes. So we'll go on to the next item of business, which is a public hearing to consider amending Title 17, Chapter 19, General Commercial District, and Title 17, Chapter 20, Central Commercial District of Kaysville City Code.
Thank you.
Yeah, so apparently we have some individuals here that are wanting to speak towards the sign code, so
You want to
I'd like to
move
ask
that
the
one
chair to
forward?
consider switching, going on to the sign code and coming back to the car wash, although I know we do have an individual in the audience that's here for that one as well.
There's kids here now, so they can go first.
Is that something we have to vote on, or is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Take a motion.
So do we have someone that will be willing to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to bring item number 7 up to the next item, and then we'll move item,
Just swap item 6.
swap item 6 and 7, move item 7 up, and then do item 6 after that.
I'll second
Okay.
it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Commissioner Keach, we'll start with you with the voting.
Aye.
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 Okay, so we'll move those items, item up 7. So we'll have the public hearing now for the, but we'll have the staff present, and then we'll have the public hearing on this sign of regulation.
So this is one where we thought we had, or I at least thought that we had figured it out, but at the last city council meeting, the council asked us to come, or asked staff to bring an amendment forward to limit sign heights within a certain distance of the West Davis corridor. So candidly, I'm kind of shooting from the hip with some of this because there is not anything close by really that exists to look at how to do this. So we did have some information that was presented to the commission probably back in February, and actually it was in January. Some of that information that came to the commission was not really accurate. I attribute that to a kind of a novice look at land use, which is very complex. Centerville does have a provision in their code that states they, within 150 feet, I think, of a shore, they have a shore preservation ordinance. And so they wouldn't allow signage within 150 feet of the shore of the Great Salt Lake. Other than that, there really is nothing that other cities do to regulate anything along the Legacy Corridor, which is a scenic byway. That being said, there's also really only one exit right now, apart from Park Station, that has, I think, a kind of similar situation to what we have going on here. The only property right now that is zoned commercial and would really be applicable to this is out at 200 North and the future West Davis corridor. So to just kind of give a graphic representation of what I know exists off of Parish Lane, which is, again, that's the only exit in between on Legacy apart from Park Lane that has any type of commercial development. So these are just some slides that shows, these are the, anyway, these are apartments, I can't remember the name of them. But this is a Maverick that exists on the south side of Parish Lane. This is Legacy right here. The distance in between where that right-of-way or where that off-ramp ends and the property or the sign located there is about 665 feet. So to give another, so this just, I measured to where the actual northbound lane was, and that's about 725 feet. So now I wanted to bring this back to look at what we have here with our West Davis corridor. It's under 500 feet between where I'm measuring the UDOT right-of-way and the end of that commercial property, that property line on Westgate. And then looking at that whole length to the travel lane is 655 feet. So then to give you the visual, and this is just screenshots from, Google Streets View, but so this gives you an idea of what the sign from the northbound lane, what you would see there with the sign, that sign on, or the Maverick is 25 feet tall. And then a look from the southbound lane, and of course this is a little bit north of there, but you can see, from a visual perspective, especially being that far away, there's not much of a visual impact. I think what the city council had in mind was something more like this. Something more of like a monument style, something that would be integrated more into the landscape. And so where I was saying, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. So I just put in a height of 10 feet. We did go out and measure that sign today at Smith's Marketplace, and it's probably 16 feet tall. Yeah, way more. So 10 feet isn't, it's not a lot to work with, but I think that's something that the council would be okay with. But really, this is now open for discussion to just kind of get a feel from what the Planning Commission would want to recommend. I do want to make one other notation with this, that whatever change we have here would not be applicable to the Come and Go gas station. They already have their building permits in, and we determined earlier that based on the inconsistencies with the ordinance, they would be allowed to do a 30-foot tall sign. They submitted one that was 25 feet, and that was another thing that they were trying to kind of acquiesce on and help out with the neighbors and their concerns to not go the full 30 feet. But this would not be applicable, something that we would not be able to regulate with the Come and Go store. So That said, the only other parcel that exists at this time that this would be applicable to would be the other parcel, if it does end up going through the subdivision process over there with the Westgate Commercial Subdivision.
I have a comment. So there is, I guess your answer is going to be no when I ask you if there's any way for us to do a temporary regulation to study this, because they already have an application in for a sign permit, correct? Okay, so the purpose of this amendment to the sign regulation would really be only for the future going forward if the Come and Go were to modify their sign and then be caught by the non-conforming provisions that would require them to come completely into conformance.
Well, you also have another lot there, Paul.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
the subdivision, so there is another lot, so another business can
Yeah,
come
that,
in.
if that subdivision goes
Yes.
through, there
Thank you,
would be
Will.
that second lot. So, and to let you know, the council, I think, was incredibly disappointed that we couldn't get this to be applicable to the Come and Go gas station, but they got their building permit in before we could get, I mean, so can we draw a line in the sand now and say we have a pending ordinance regulation? Absolutely. In fact, we could have when we posted the agenda last Friday. They just didn't, you know, I mean, Come and Go's been working on this since last summer, so.
When did
it's
we
not
first see it at Planning Commission? The discussion about sign ordinance?
We saw that on January 23rd.
And they had a plat application in before that?
Yeah, so sorry, let me go back. I think,
What we didn't have, Josh, is we didn't have it agended as an item for discussion, which is what you really need to have in order to make the pending ordinance rule applicable. We hadn't had it as an agenda item to decide whether we wanted to go forward and consider amending our ordinance.
yeah, so we first had the sign code in front of the planning commission, and it was the meeting before that, January 12th, yeah. And then the question of whether or not it was a scenic byway came up, and so we brought that back at the 23rd meeting. And that was the same meeting where that preliminary plat subdivision for the Westgate Commercial Subdivision was on the agenda. So they ended up being on the same agenda and being, right, at that point in time, I think, related.
So based on our training that we had last week, I think, 2 weeks ago, they are vested with the ability to have a 30-foot sign under the existing zone regulations. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so, I mean, if we go back and walk through this, then we had that on the 12th. We brought it back on the 23rd. And then we had the question of, I think it was the meeting on the 23rd that we came back and determined that the numbering in our master street plan shows the number for Legacy as State Route 67. West Davis corridor is going to have a different number, and so I even went back and looked at minutes from, I think it was like 2007, and the council changed that street designation from Legacy Highway to State Route 67. And so it was our belief at that time then that based on, you know, the plain text, whatever, interpreting in favor of the applicant, which is in state code, that the West Davis corridor would be a arterial road that then would have allowed them to have had a 30-foot tall sign. So I stated that in the meeting on the 23rd of January. I stated that again in the public meeting where the preliminary subdivision plat was in front of the city council. I think that was the 16th of December. February. So we did have that, yes, in the beginning, but then we had 2 public meetings where we came back and said, look, they can do 30 feet, they can do 30 feet. And then they did get their building permit in, and the council had hoped to, I think, beat to the punch on that, but it just didn't happen. So we were, and I mean, to give a little bit more detail about that, right, the pending ordinance, the council had email dialogue about that the night before, adding that to the agenda. The agenda was posted shortly after 1 o'clock. The building permit was finalized and completed, and fees were paid about 11:30 a.m. So there
What was
was
the date on
really
that?
about an hour and a half difference between those, but also the agenda for the city council had it listed as a work item, not an action item. They didn't have a
Yep.
draft ordinance prepared. They didn't have really even any significant information other than it said limiting signs. And so limiting could be 29 feet, limiting could be 9 feet. So we just determined that, you know, looking at all the facts and the vesting with that building permit application, that it would not be applicable to them. So
Melinda, what was the date on that? You said the time was like 10, there's about an hour and a half difference, but what was the date that happened on?
So, so we just had this discussion on March, I think the 2nd, right? So they would have had, it was the 26th that the city council agenda was posted. But even as it was posted, it's questionable at best anyway, because again, it was listed as a discussion item, not an action item. There was really no information, I mean, not a staff report, there wasn't a draft agenda. And so it would be quite a stretch, even if the building permit came in after that agenda was posted, I think it would be quite a stretch to see whether or not that was enough to trigger that pending ordinance.
Another question then. Thank you for the explanation. When the site plan was turned in, were there building elevations? Was there an elevation for a sign? Was a sign proposed as part of the initial
Yes.
site plan? Okay, then that, yep.
Renderings,
Yep.
all of
Yep.
the elevations for
Okay.
the sign, the height, everything is in there.
Okay, so then my initial question is still true then, and that is, there's no way to not have a 30-foot sign for this building. The question is whether or not we're going to amend the ordinance, recommend to the council to amend the ordinance so that an additional lot within a certain distance of West Davis is going to be able to have it. And is that correct?
Yeah.
That's the purpose of what we're doing tonight.
Yeah, and if there were to be any other property out along the corridor, right, there's another interchange down at 950 West.
Ooh, yeah.
Some of that could potentially be rezoned as commercial, and if it was within Kaysville, it would be subject to whatever would be put in place.
Yeah. Okay, so, I'm sorry, everybody, I have an additional question. I have several questions here. By the way, I wrote Centerville's Parish Lane on I-15, which was 60-foot tall signs within 600 feet of the interchange to allow those businesses that pay a super high price for that property next to an interchange to have the signs. And I think it's worked pretty well. But the real question I have here is, okay, so on the come and go, it's set in stone. We're not going to be able to do anything about that. But the real question I have is, does the state of Utah allow for the logo signs on the, of what's coming up, so you don't have, are those signs allowable? I haven't seen any on Legacies. Anybody else?
No.
I haven't
They're
seen
not
it
allowed?
either, and
I
I
don't
haven't seen.
think
If they're not allowed, see, this is a great
My
way.
guess is they are not allowed, because otherwise I think that Maverick off the parish would have one.
Yeah.
It is insanity that those are not allowed, because they're very small, they're super useful. It helped, I wrote my master's thesis on sign regulations, not patting myself on the back. But I'm saying, I literally did this for my master's thesis 32 years ago. And so I know a lot about sign regulations, but those logo signs that you see on I-15 as you're coming up to an exit are so helpful, because it reduces the need for billboards or big tall signs at the interchange. And so if there is any way to get those as you come to 950, as you come to 200 North, it really makes this somewhat of a moot point because those are very small, and I don't see how it's going to ruin the birds and the bees and the bugs and the vista, out there. So that's just a major question I have, because I think we could lean on that to say, why do we need a 30-foot sign for either of the locations? The 30-foot tall sign is just, it's superfluous. If you have those highway logo signs coming from the south and from the north, people will know, oh, there's a gas station there. They don't need a 30-foot sign. Besides, the 30-foot sign isn't going to be visible with the interchange. You've got all the ramping. It's really not going to be that visible. You have trees, you have other stuff. Over time, that 30-foot sign is, I think, superfluous. But they're gonna have it because that's just the way businesses do it.
Well, and there is, I think, a unique association with sign and needs with a convenience store and a gas station, and that is that they're also advertising fuel prices, and they're advertising whether or not they have diesel fuel, which not every gas station has, and those who drive a diesel vehicle know that you can get some pretty stressful moments there when you need to gas up and you can't find a gas station that has the diesel.
Yeah. That's why I think those signs are important, and the pole sign isn't going to give you all that. If you're going along at, okay, let's admit, none of us are going to drive 55 in all likelihood, okay? We're supposed to. You're going faster than that. And the one thing I know from having studied sign stuff is when you're traveling that fast, that sign has to be really big for your brain to see it and slow down and make the turn off the freeway. But the logo signs, well in advance of the interchange, allow people to make a decision much quicker.
Yep.
So I guess what I'm suggesting, instead of going on about that, is we should look into that to see if there's any way possible. Talk to UDOT, talk to Carlos. You and I know Carlos. I worked with Carlos like crazy on trying to get Legacy further west in Centerville to follow the sheep road instead of cutting through the business park. We failed.
Yes.
Anyway, we should find out if that could happen, because that is actually a much more effective way of providing public safety. One of the notes I have here is the ordinance we're proposing is super restrictive, and I think it's superfluous if we have the highway logo signs. But there is a public safety necessity to advertise what's coming up. Late at night, somebody coming home, they're low on gas, they're low on blood sugar, whatever. There might be a lot of reasons people need to know that it's there. But a pole sign just really doesn't do it.
Low on air pressure tire.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't think that they allow those types of signage off the scenic byway. And I'm just shooting from the hip there again with the answer, but, I don't, when I'm getting off at Park Lane, I don't see the sign for the Wendy's or the sign for the whatever, which you normally have, right? It's lodging, it's the convenience stores and eating establishments, and I don't think any of that exists. No,
I think coming up to Parrish from the south, there is, before you get to the X. I'll double check for the Maverick. Either way, we should try to figure out if there's a way to do that. That's just common sense for the public, and I don't know what overriding.
And on this, there is, we do have now the pending ordinance, and so there isn't a rush on trying to get this. We can bring this back and see what information we can get from UDOT as far as whether or not they allow those types of signs. I did do some searching and just really wasn't able to find anything on what they do with scenic byways. It was pretty unhelpful. So it's probably just a call I'd have to make and see if I can get the right person on the phone to get those answered questions. But I suspect that if they were allowed, I know there's not one heading southbound for that Parrish Lane exit for a Maverick. I know there's not one.
Yeah, I agree. I used it the other day, I didn't see one.
I don't think I know that I drive it every day.
That's true.
I don't drive northbound to get off that exit very frequently, but I don't think it exists. I think that actually Dexter and I took a drive with the streets view, and we couldn't find any of those signs, but we can confirm that.
I might just be imagining that it's there, yeah. I also noticed that we don't have a definition in our sign code. You've got all the definition for signs in there, But we don't have a definition of a corridor commercial logo sign or a commercial logo highway sign. And if they're not allowed, then we don't need one. But if they could be allowed, I think we would want to add a definition there. And then I'm confused about our definition of why we have no definition of a freestanding or a pole sign. So the sign that Come and Go's proposing, the 30-foot sign, it's a monument or a ground sign? Most cities call.
I think we would call it a ground sign, but it's 25 feet that they're proposing.
Yeah, see, ground signs usually mean like a monument sign, a
Yeah,
pedestal sign.
I think.
Freestanding, a
some of our
freestanding sign, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
You know, or even pole sign.
I think some of our definitions are a little bit weird. but-
That'd be a recommendation I would suggest is
Just
the
another
ground.
section of our code.
What? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, but I think that's, I looked and I went, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. But anyway, I've had 3 or 4 comments, so,
So, and I did include, as I had earlier, some of there were some additional red lines that were just cleaning up things. So those were the same from what I presented back in January, but then the main change was just kind of adding this other section down on the bottom here, which again, it's probably, maybe it's easier to look at on the slide here. But, you know, I really, the 10 feet was a starting point for me.
Yeah.
I don't know what feelings the commission has on that, if it needs to be 8, if 12's okay, or if 16, like what we have over at the Smith's Marketplace is acceptable. That's just something that,
Yeah, I mean, what you're really talking about here is not really that it's visible from the West Davis.
you
Because.
wouldn't be able to see it.
Yeah,
Period.
I mean,
What-
you're going to be far enough away.
yeah.
And like you just showed in the pictures from Centerville, it's going to be quite a ways away. And we're not going to allow them to be high enough to really be visible from that distance anyway. So
Yeah, and-
we're really still talking about it being basically what we've got elsewhere, which are those ground signs or monument signs.
Yeah. And this too, the grade coming through Parish is going to be similar to what we have over here at 200 North.
Yep.
It'll be above grade.
Yeah.
So, you know.
It'd be hard to see.
And,
Yeah.
and I think, you know, you go look out on, oh my God, Bangor, where they have some of those signs like the ground sign, like it's in that you showed at Smith's. You know, some of them are like, get really big, so there's a definition on width and height. I think we need to, you know, I think sometimes as a developer, when they look at that, I mean, 10 feet, are you going to be able to get the full logo and the full extent on there that they want? I think you might want to go a little higher,
Yeah.
but not much. A property I worked on in Scottsdale, I think the city down there went up to 18, but they conformed the width to allow the logo. So, but they also had a design standard, so it had to be certain stone, had to be certain lighting. The lighting had to be conformed to their lighting standard. So it depends on what your design standard might want to include.
Sure. Well, and it does beg to be mentioned that, of course, Smith's Marketplace, they have any number of businesses over there that they have to provide some signage for. The only location that this would be applicable to at this point, we would have 2 businesses. We would have the Come and Go, and then whatever else comes in, probably a car wash. And so, you know, it's easier to fit one business on a 10-foot tall sign than it is to fit 5 or 6 on a sign of that size. So again, this was just, I think the council had something in mind when they had the discussion, but they weren't really able to give any more particulars. But we did some internal stuff, discussions. We did feel like, as far as signs go, this is a pretty decent looking sign. There's not a whole lot you can do to make signs look really awesome. But this, I think, is a really nice looking sign. And so I think they kind of wanted to do something more of like the monument sign, but then with our monument definition, I think we only get up to 4 feet. And that doesn't seem adequate either. So this was just, I think, a starting place. And Really was just looking for some direction and discussion from the planning commission on thoughts on that.
We having a public hearing on this?
Yes, we have to have a public hearing. Yeah, so we're, any other questions for the staff? Or should we open questions for public hearing? Okay, we'll open the public hearing. So anybody that wanted to speak to this, please come forward and state your name at the podium.
Blake Montgomery. I live 200 feet from where the proposed 25-foot sign is going to be. Just a reminder, on March 2nd, the City Council did unanimously agree, and they specifically addressed the commercial lot onto the northwest Davis corridor that we're talking about, that the sign should be a monument-type sign. It was then brought up in that meeting how high a monument-type sign should be, and they mentioned 8 feet. I'd encourage, if you didn't see that meeting, go back and watch the meeting. They were very clear on what that should be. Also in the meeting on January 26th with you, the Planning Commission, you also agreed that a high sign out there was unnecessary, that it should be lower, and you wanted it to be lower. Also, just about how convenient is it that Come and Go beat the City Council by an hour and a half. The City Council wanted to set Kaysville apart and be a leader of the sign precedence along this scenic byway that is West Davis Corridor. As you enter Kaysville from the east side on 200 North, there's a beautiful monument sign that says, "Welcome to Kaysville." It's a Kaysville sign, and it says, "This is Utah's hometown." As you consider this text amendment tonight, as Utah's hometown, please strongly consider the City Council's recommendation to set the precedence for the signage along the West Davis corridor by only allowing monumental signs of 8 feet and lower. Once again, the City Council was very clear that this is what they required. I don't know where disconnect comes from. I don't know where the speed bumps are coming from. Us as citizens on this whole entire Come and Go situation, it felt like there's not even a playing field for us. Anytime we do have concerns, those concerns get thrown to the side. It feels like other concerns get brought forward from Come and Go, and they win. Please help us win something.
Hello, my name is Clarissa Parker, and I feel it very important to be here as I have my 4 kids with me, one's in the hall screaming way past their bedtime. But I am here because my husband is out of town, and that's why I have all 4 kids. Anyway, I'm here because I feel like it's very important that truth be spoken and you have the full scope of what's going on and happening so you can make an educated decision, as I have full faith that you will. First off, I want to point out the example that was presented on Parish Lane, which we're all probably very familiar with. That sign at the Maverick that's 25 feet, is that what it was? It is 25 feet because it is in close proximity to I-15. So I-15 is close enough that it has some ability to change where that sign height was rather than its distance to the Legacy Highway. But I want to make it very clear that as the code currently stands, and it's written, it would only allow for an 8-foot monument sign for Come and Go. So, Ms. Greenwood, could you please, am I allowed to ask questions? Is that okay? Okay. I just want to, has the street designation already been changed for that West Davis corridor? Like we said, I know it's a technicality, but if the technicality is going to work for us,
So I'd be happy to answer that after the public hearings.
Yeah, after the public hearing, she can address it later. You're fine to ask the question, but we'll address later.
okay, so as it's currently written, I mean, I checked the website where the code is this afternoon at like 4 o'clock. It has that by code, West Davis corridor is not designated as a principal arterial street. Legacy Highway was, but not West Davis corridor. Was that a mistake? Sure, but maybe it was. But as of right now, the code on the city's website, only an 8-foot monument sign would be allowed because West Davis corridor is not a principal arterial street. So, will you please follow through with your initial intentions, just like Blake mentioned at the first meeting? Please follow through with those initial intentions as well as that of the City Council, and protect the scenic byway as well as the neighboring communities. The power is still in your hands. Make that choice. And I just really want to make sure that you're making an educated choice and that all the facts that you've been presented with are in fact true. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Any other discussion, commissioners?
I have a few comments. So I think when this came before us before, at least the one time that I was here when we talked about it, I was saying I think we should have a lot smaller, shorter signs. And so on that front, I think what's proposed, 10 feet, for example, is fine. But to get to the more crux of maybe the citizens who are here and those who are not here, and to bend the council's ear, or at least Councilwoman Hunt's ear, it's not a foregone conclusion that it sounds to me like there is some potential area or room for debate about whether the city had initiated formal proceedings to amend its ordinance. And there's also another option available for the council or for the citizens. And let me just quickly explain what I mean here. So we've kind of been alluding to this principle or this law that's on the books, but let me just quote it. This is out of Utah Code. This is Utah Code 10-9A-509, paragraph 1, paragraph II. And just bear with me, because I think this is very relevant to what we've been talking about and what the citizens' concerns are. And so this is really to the council and then maybe for us to discuss. That section says, an applicant is entitled to approval of a land use application, be that a building permit, a subdivision, any type of land use application. An applicant is entitled to approval. This means they're vested. If the application conforms to the requirements of the applicable land use regulations, I'm going to shorten this, in effect when the applicant submits a complete application and pays application fees. That's what Come and Go is relying on. Hey, we submitted our application, we paid the fees. What's on the books at that minute in time is what we are vested in. That's what the code says. However, the code also says they are vested at that time unless one of two things occurs. The first one says, they are vested unless the land use authority on the record formally finds that a compelling, countervailing public interest would be jeopardized by approving the application and specifies, and the council has to specify, land use authority would be the council specifies the compelling, countervailing public interest in writing. So don't even get to the application question. Now, this is a big question. I think this could go either way. Some people might say 10 or 15 feet of a sign out there by West Davis Corridor is not a, quote, compelling, countervailing public interest. Those citizens who are here tonight would disagree with that. But that is, the council has an out if they want it. They could say, hey, we want this to be a gateway to Kaysville City. We don't want the sign to be too tall. We find that as a compelling, countervailing public interest that would be jeopardized if we allowed tall signs. You don't even have to get to the you don't have to get to the application first in time, first in right question. You can go there if you're the council. But the second one says, so let me repeat, an applicant is vested at the time they submit a complete application. They're vested in what's on the books at that moment unless there's a compelling, countervailing public interest that the city council would find, or the municipality, I'm going to read it, the municipality formally initiates proceedings to amend the municipality's land use regulations in a manner that would prohibit approval of the application as submitted. That's what we've been talking about. If we've started that process. We've, quote, formally initiated proceedings to amend the code such that it would not allow the 25 or 35-foot sign, then that process governs, not the application, if that makes sense. So my point, I guess, to the citizens and according to the council too is maybe there's an out if the council wants to do it to that first paragraph. And I think what it sounds like, there's enough question that the citizens could, if the timeline hasn't passed, and it's usually a 30-day timeline, maybe it's less. If the timeline hasn't passed, citizens who are aggrieved by this could appeal this decision. So if you haven't, I would suggest talking to a land use attorney about pooling some funds together or whatever. And I know that doesn't make the council happy for me to say that to get the city into litigation, but if if this code or the state law or whatever hasn't been violated, that's what litigation is for. So I think signs should be shorter. I'm fine with it as it's proposed, but that misses the point of this issue. And I think for the citizens, if you want to, I think there's enough foothold for you to really advocate to the council to find a compelling countervailing public interest to make the sign shorter, or you could appeal the decision that the city hadn't started these proceedings ahead of these applications from come and go.
So if I can maybe address some of those, Josh?
Yeah.
The compelling countervailing public interest. I'm not a legal scholar enough to tell you that it's exactly specific court cases or whatever. But all of the guidance that I've been given is that what that means is people are going to die if we don't stop people from exercising a right that they would normally have. And the examples that are usually given are things like we approved a subdivision, houses are being built, houses are starting to slide off the mountain because either we didn't do enough geologic investigation or conditions changed or something happened. And if somebody comes now and says, well, I have a right to build this because it's an approved subdivision lot, and you say, you build a house, it might slide off the mountain and people might die. It gets to that level to become what they call a compelling countervailing public interest.
I think that's probably accurate.
And so,
but I have a counter to that, but keep going.
Yeah. But so to say that, whether a sign's going to be 25 feet high or not, probably doesn't rise to that level that people are going to die if you put a sign up to that level. On the other one about formally initiates proceedings, again, the guidance that I've been given and have heard there is that the council, the planning commission or the council, a public body, one of the public bodies, and the two public bodies that deal with land use ordinances are the planning commission and the council. One of those bodies has to actually put on an agenda that they're going to consider a change to an ordinance and specify what the ordinance is that they're going to consider changing. And in the meeting, they make a positive affirmation that they want to look at changing the ordinance. They don't have to say how they're going to change it or what it's going to be changed to. They just have to say, we think there's some issues here, we want to change it. And it's got to be to that level before it starts that pending ordinance doctrine is what that's called. So we have not, my understanding is that the city had not put anything on an agenda yet. We talked about some of this informally in some other meetings and things, but there was never an agenda item put on saying we should consider changing the sign ordinance or what other ordinances that had been talked about.
Well,
That's my understanding, and that's, I think, the guidance that the city's working under. Now, I think you are right that citizens or anyone could say, well, we challenge your determination.
We think there's enough gray area here.
Yeah. And there is
let's
gray
do that.
area.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. There is gray area here because I don't think there's been definitive rulings on some of this.
Well, there's not only gray area on the law and the case law, but there's also, what it sounds like to me, and this could be figured out by the citizens if they've done enough digging, there's also gray area on the facts. What was on what agenda? What was discussed? What did the agenda say? When was it posted? Because I know we talked about it.
We talked about it in January.
A lawyer can make hay with that
Yeah.
and get a settlement or something that gets us closer to what we want if we're citizens.
So just for my own benefit, not on behalf of the city or anything, just for my own benefit, because I'd heard some of this discussion going on, I talked to probably one of the top land use attorneys in the state. And I said, hey, what would you consider? How about this? The timing of when these applications were submitted and so on. And the answer I got from him was, that is a really gray area. He didn't say no, but he said, that's a really gray area.
He sounds like a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. He said the safest way, he said the most sure way is for the city to actually have it as an agenda item than what we just talked about.
Yeah, that's
He says
the clear
that's the most
question.
sure way.
Yes.
He says the other part of it, he says that's really gray.
Yeah.
Could we back up, though? I think I was trying to get to this point with my first question, which was, when their initial application was turned in, did it show a sign that complied with the ordinance on the books at the time the application was made? And if that is the case, I think it's a very high bar to get over that, to say, oh, well, after they turned this in, paid their fees, and there was a complete application, we don't want that sign. There are other ways to get the sign not built. One of them is, has anybody asked Come and Go if they'd be willing to not have it? And the reason I asked that is because we asked Lone Star Steakhouse and Saloon in Centerville not to put the saloon on. I was there when we made that request. The city council begged them and said, we know it's part of your trademark, but it doesn't meet our community standard, we don't like it. And they took it off. Now, Come and Go could be requested to take that down, but in all my years of doing land use, we should be stamping applications when they come in. Do we stamp plans when they come in with the date stamp? Electronically is fine, yep. A red stamp doesn't hurt either. But if that initial application came in, I think it's unfair to the applicant. They have an investment-backed expectation to rely on the ordinances that are on the books. I don't like pole signs. I wrote my master's thesis because I worked for Sandy City, and Sandy City tried to get every damn pole sign they had down. I don't like pole signs, and I got a lot of them down in the time I was there. But you've got to follow your laws and ordinances too. And when they had made their initial application and paid their fees and turned their plans in, that's going to be really hard to defeat through any kind of action by the staff, the planning commission, or the city council. I just don't see that being overcome.
I don't think, at least I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying, though, and what the state law says that I quoted is, if the city had formally initiated proceedings to change the ordinance such that the sign would not be allowed, before that application came in, the state law says they're not vested, and it's so gray, both on the law and the facts, that it would be worth it for a citizen to make that claim is the point. But
I would agree with you, but I think the case here is that they turned their stuff in before we ever put anything on an agenda to discuss.
So, no, they did not.
Correct.
We had
That's
this
correct.
on January 12th and again on January 23rd or whatever it was, but it was to increase the sign, not decrease.
well, it was okay, sure. So that's in favor of the applicant, no doubt.
But when did the Come and Go subdivision, when was it submitted to the city? Originally, when did they?
In August of last year.
And were there building elevations showing a pole sign back then, or was it just
I
a
have to
subdivision?
go. We've reviewed their site plan several times.
Okay,
But-
I would check the date on the site plan, because then you'll have a definitive answer. When they applied for subdivision and/or /site plan, you check those dates, then it doesn't matter what we did in January. I'm sorry. I've taken 100 of these things to city
That's
attorneys in the past. And no
100%.
city attorney's going to say, yeah, we're on good ground here. Let's go ahead and try.
That's exactly what the law says, state law.
So I would just check those dates, because I think we're spinning our wheels here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that, this is good to help the citizens understand, what vesting means, but this doesn't have anything to do with the sign ordinance regulation that we're before us right now. Okay, so I would propose we move on and talk about the ordinance change and table this discussion we're having right now.
I have a comment. Can we get the answer to her question?
Yeah, I feel like it's vital to the discussion.
We asked
can I restate what I understand it to be?
Is
And
the
then-
public hearing still
So I-
open?
No, we closed the public hearing.
We did?
If it's the chair's pleasure, I can answer that. If it's not, then I can email them both and send them information as to why we're determining the way we are. Whatever the
I'm okay
chair's
with
pleasure
it.
is.
Are you okay with an email?
I'd like an answer right now.
Yeah.
So let me just say, I'm sorry, let me just say, I take offense and some exception to some of the comments that have been here tonight. My job is to help the city operate within the confines of law. Period, end of story. That is exactly what I have been trying to do for the last 2 months. It doesn't matter what the residents' opinion are on what a countervailing public interest is. Does not matter. It matters what the city attorney thinks it is.
Yep.
And it matters what we, our internal discussions, think it is. Not my problem that land use is so complex and that lay people don't understand it enough so that they have these perspectives that just don't vibe with what laws and case laws and how we have to operate. Not my problem. Also not my problem that this has come about and people don't like it. No rules have been changed on anybody. They bought into this how it existed. And it's been an incredibly fatiguing process at every single turn to say no one's listened, no one's done anything. That is not true. It is not true of the city. It is not true of the applicant come and go. And I take exception to that. That being said, let me answer the question. So we all know we had an appeal last fall, and that appeal was on a conditional use permit where the code was vague and ambiguous. State law requires us, as does case law requires us to err in favor of the applicant. So when we go back and look at our major street plan and it references some State Route 67 that doesn't even exist in Kaysville, the only reason why that would exist is because it was in relation to the West Davis corridor. I asked the Public Works Director, after I had the dawn on me driving home from that meeting on the 12th, what is State Route 67? His answer to me was West Davis corridor. The only reason why that was listed in our major street plan is because initially this was going to be North Legacy. It was never called West Davis corridor. It was going to be a continuation, and it is a continuation of Legacy. So
It was actually all of it was originally called the West Davis Highway.
That's true.
Sure.
And then they changed the name Legacy, but this stayed
And
West
then they
Davis.
just recently
yeah.
renumbered, they
60 years
renumbered
ago.
it.
right, so now West Davis corridor is going to be numbered State Route 177, not State Route 67. But all of that leads us to the place where, again, state law requires us, whether or not we like it, to err on the side of the applicant. So we go back and we look at, yes, West Davis Highway is classified as a major collector, and therefore a 30-foot tall sign is allowed. And that's where we came to on that. So the day they applied for their building permit in February, yes, they met the requirements on the books. And that's where we're coming to that, that interpretation. So I'd be happy to, in fact, I think the appeal information is on our website, but that is where we came up with that, and I think we are on solid ground with that interpretation. Now, again, as you've said, if anyone feels aggrieved by that, they can go right ahead and do whatever they feel like is necessary to right that wrong. But land use law in Utah heavily favors the applicant. So that doesn't make me a corrupt staff. It doesn't make me feeding information to come and go on the back end so that they can get what they want. It makes us follow the laws as they are and as they exist. And that's exactly what we've tried to do with every single turn. And yes, I have asked Come and Go if they would be willing to reduce their sign height. They gave us a 25-foot sign instead of a 30-foot sign. Come and Go, and I know we're not talking about this, but Come and Go has made a lot of changes to their site to appease the neighbors over there. And clearly there are some neighbors that still aren't satisfied and will never be satisfied. But that is not our problem. Our problem is, again, operating within the confines of the laws and the ordinances and the regulations that we have on the books at this point in time. And that is exactly what we have done.
And just as somebody who was in your position, Melinda, I agree with what you said 100%. job number one for city employees, one of the top jobs is to keep your employer out of court. And land use planning is, I think, either number one or number two for municipal insurers. It's number one by far. Land use issues, zoning issues, cities get sued over land use more than any other issue. So planning directors, community development directors like Melinda, and I was one for 25 years, Wilf was one for longer than that, you try to follow the law incredibly closely to avoid going to court. And because it's extremely expensive for cities to insure and have to pay things out. So I just want to state my support for staff because I know where they've been, I know where they are, and that's why I've been trying to say, you know, on the record tonight, when did this stuff come in? When was there a date stamp? Did it comply at that time? Because I think it renders this issue really moot. So I think we are stuck, and I don't want anybody to take what I've said as a vote of support for come and go. It's not, okay? It's not. It's just, fact is, they make an application, they have to rely on the laws that are on the books. And it looks to me like the laws that are on the books and the way we have interpreted them is correct. So we probably should go back and do what Toby wanted to do. Well, let's address the ordinance that's in place, and maybe there's something else that can be done. But I think it is what it is.
The agenda item is to consider changing the regulation close to a scenic byway. That's somewhat immaterial to any of the conversation we've had. I think it shows good faith to the citizens. It reflects the conversations that have happened in the past several city council meetings. I have no problem with it as proposed to pass that on to the city council.
Thanks. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a motion.
Hmm? Yeah.
I'd make a suggestion on your far upper right box where it's wall sign. It's confusing to me that wall signs would not be taller than 10 feet. I think that that's superfluous. Go up one box. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. That looks like it was a cut and paste. Wall signs. See what I'm saying? I think you can, you know, whatever, it's attached to the building, and, you know, if you want to add something about illumination in there, but I think that verbiage shouldn't go forward because it's not applicable to a wall sign. And I think I had a couple of others. Well, I've got other issues, but they're not germane to this issue. So I think we need a new definition of a ground sign, if we need to add a freestanding sign thing in there, but that's not important tonight.
Melinda, what is the 200 North out here? What is it designated as in the city's street plan?
Let me pull it up.
Is it a principal arterial?
It's a major, it's going to be a major collector.
That's what I'm wondering.
I don't think it's an arterial,
I'll show this traced.
In here.
at least down in Salt Lake County. I know I-215 is classified as an arterial.
It's a minor arterial.
It's a minor arterial, so it's not a principal. What are our principal arterials in the city?
I-15, 89, and West Davis Corridor, formerly known as State Route 67.
And that's it?
Yeah.
Okay. So otherwise, if it's not along a principal arterial or within a certain distance of a principal arterial in our code, then it's,
Yeah, so that's where Ms. Parker is getting her interpretation, that it would be along 200 North, that's a minor arterial, and they would only be allowed an 8-foot sign.
well, but you know, I mean, when you look at the on-premise and ground sign provision in the PU, GC, CC, and LI zones, it says within 1,320 feet of a principal arterial, it can be up to 30 feet tall. That's what our current ordinance says. And if that West Davis is considered to be a principal arterial, the sign can now be up to 30 feet tall.
Correct.
Even if you make these amendments, it's still going to be, because it's still in the code back here.
So
Because here you talk about within 450 feet of a scenic byway, and that's fine. But back here, it says that if it's within 1,320 feet of a principal arterial, it can be up to 30 feet tall.
right, and that's where we're getting that interpretation that going back to the major street plan, State Route 67,
Yeah.
AKA Legacy, AKA West Davis Corridor, is a principal arterial, they get 30 feet.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
But you're
I
saying
don't-
that
I
with
don't
what
know
we
that-
have presented here, that is in conflict with what is listed above in that section?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a conflict. You know, you're
Okay.
going to have a conflict there because you're going to say here within a scenic byway, it can only be so tall, but back here it says within so many feet of a principal arterial, it can be this tall. So there's a conflict there. Or there will be a conflict if this gets adopted.
If it's a scenic byway, does it supersede the?
Well, that's the question. It doesn't say it supersedes it.
Okay.
And so maybe there just needs to be something added to it to say that this would supersede any other provision or something.
I think it would
like
probably be interpreted as an exception. It would kind of,
that. Yeah. And it probably would help if you just say that, wouldn't it, Josh? Just-
I mean, yeah, clarity is always better, yeah.
If that's the intent.
Well, and in some cities, there's a specific language in the zoning code that says, in the event of a conflict, the stricter provision shall apply, or the
Yeah,
opposite.
yep, that's true too.
In the event of a conflict, the less restrictive provision
Yeah.
shall apply, or the applicant, right? The
Yeah.
tie goes to the runner.
That's true. I'd have to take a look and see if that's.
So if we, yeah,
in
we
the
might
code.
want to
I
look
don't
at
know
that
that it
language
is.
to see, in the event of a conflict, which one do you defer to?
Right.
But I think you make a good point, Wilf.
With that amendment that is being made right now, is there any other discussion needed, or I would be ready to entertain a motion?
Make changes and bring it back where the council's or commission's pleasure is.
I mean, I'm just wondering, everywhere else, it's going to be 8 feet. And here, if it's within this distance of a scenic byway, we're going to make it 10 feet. Does the 2 feet really make a difference?
No, nope.
I'm just wondering. Paul, you're the sign,
Yeah,
Well-
sign master.
Give us a sign, Paul, give us a
Well,
sign.
that's why I was saying, I've got all sorts of issues with the stuff we have in here. This is really a very crude sign code, and it's not a poor reflection on staff.
No.
Sign regulations, every city, every planner I've ever known has said, please, anything but a sign amendment. They are, sign codes are impossible, because you can't, they're so hard to model. It's really hard to model. And so they're very difficult. So I have quite a few suggestions in here that would clear this up a little bit. But for the issue at hand,
You're hired, Commissioner.
I've offered. I've done these many times. Sign regulations are very frustrating. But other than one suggestion I made, getting it out of the box, you know, that language is not applicable. There's other stuff that needs to be done. Is time of the essence with this issue?
No, because I think what we have established here is a pending ordinance. So anything for the next 6 months, we can legitimately say we are revising the ordinance and looking at, making changes. So
Yeah.
if there were to be something that came in within this next 6 months, we would tell them that
Yeah.
we wouldn't accept an application until this is settled.
Yeah. So if there was something that were going to come in down on 950 in our jurisdiction,
Right.
we could look at that. Or we could look at that just in case, right?
Sure.
So we have 6 months.
Yep,
right?
180 days.
Well, then, and when did that clock start?
I would say when we posted the agenda this evening, one or the
That's
other.
true, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so-
All it has to be is 24 hours in advance of the meeting. So is that what we're proposing? Is we're proposing a study period, a temporary regulation?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Or
essentially
just a
having
pending ordinance, Paul.
What?
Yeah.
I think just a pending ordinance.
pending ordinance, yeah.
Okay, is that
The
what
fact
we're
that we're,
calling?
the fact that we're saying that we're looking at the ordinance tonight to make some
Okay,
changes.
all right, then I'm gonna make a motion, unless someone else wants to make one. No. Hearing no one, I'll make a motion that we continue this matter to a future date, and that in the meantime, we study the following issues. We focus on getting an answer from legal counsel on the issue of the designation of West Davis versus Legacy, State Road 67 versus 177.
I think they already, Paul, I think they already did that. That's why they,
We've already walked through that,
Oh.
and that's why I mentioned that again in the meeting at the 23rd and the planning commission meeting on January 23rd, and then the city council meeting on February 2nd.
Okay, so we're in that process.
Correct.
Okay, then I'll just make a simple motion that we continue this for further discussion. And if anybody has, anything they want to add to that as something to look at, or to direct staff, I'm open to a friendly amendment, or even a hostile one.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion to table the item to continue our future date and a second.
Toby, we need to avoid, well, my motion was to continue, not table.
Okay, well,
There's a
sorry,
big
we have
difference
motion to
between those
continue
two.
this discussion at a later date, so sorry, yes. Thank you.
Table
for-
means indefinitely. We're not doing that. So
Okay.
this is a continuing
We'll
item.
continue this for a later date.
Thank you.
I will start the voting with me. Aye.
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 Okay, so then voting is unanimous to table, or to continue to a later date. Now we'll go to the public hearing to consider amending the Title 17, Chapter 19 General Commercial District and Title 17, Chapter 20 Central Commercial District of the Kaysville City Code. Turn the time over to staff.
All right, so this item is before us at the request of the mayor, and I just wanted to go over, so we have had two tunnel car wash building permit applications submitted within the last year. Both of those are in very close proximity to each other, and there was some discussion a number of weeks ago, even including council member Hunt, who was here present, about trying to limit some of the locations where those were coming into. Based on that discussion and some items that came up after that time, we're here to just kind of discuss the potential limiting of those car wash locations and putting proximity regulations on those. So one of the things that we have tried to establish with the general plan that we just approved last year was to really create a city center type of a concept that would be a mixed use, that would be pedestrian friendly, that would have some really great destinations to add some vitality and people to come down to our downtown area and our Main Street area. So that is this area that's outlined here in brown. And based on that, we, again, let me just go back a little bit, but one of those car washes we discussed earlier tonight is that Mr. Car Wash. We have a pre-con set up, I think, for next week for a car wash that's going in just north of the Taco Bell on 400 West. So those are both within a very close proximity to each other. This map gives you a better depiction of where those are. So this is the car wash that we will have a pre-con on in the next couple of weeks. So their permit is paid for. They are going to start building This is the one, Mr. Car Wash did submit their building
We're a
permit
clean
a few
town.
weeks ago. So this map just shows all of the locations in the city that currently have a car wash, whether it's a tunnel or the spray car wash is what we have in existing car washes right now. So the thought was that if we come in with a text amendment and one, prohibit them in the city center or the central commercial, that would be a great way to protect our main street, our downtown area from having a use that really just isn't going to help us accomplish what we've been working towards, which is we had our Main Street project that we've worked on with trying to get a vision for our enhancements here between 200 North and 50 West over here. And then again, we've been working on a potential community reinvestment area that we hope to have brought forward to taxing entities this year and create a project area that would help us accomplish some of these broader goals that we've set forth in the general plan and with some of these other small scale plans like the Main Street preferred option. So what we have here in front of you is two different options that we were looking at. One is to prohibit locations within 1,000 feet of each other, which is that green area. The purple is 1,500 feet. And then of course those yellow boxes are where the existing car washes or the permitted / permit application car washes currently exist. So that brings us to, we had the general commercial where we were proposing that we would not allow those on property abutting Main Street, and that if they were within 1,000 feet of another existing car wash, and then anything on 200 North east of I-15. So that really goes back and protects that area that we identified in our general plan. The 1,500 feet, I think really helps to protect that going forward to the northern boundary of the city. On the eastern side here, we really don't have commercial much past where that boundary is. And then we do not have any car washes located on the west side as of now, and so we would like to see some car washes over there. And so I think, you know, this green protects kind of that core that we were looking at, and then this purple could extend that even further. But the amendment proposed for this evening for consideration is that we would prohibit car washes, again, in those three circumstances, and then it defines how we would measure those distances, which would be in a straight line from the nearest property boundary to the other property without regard, obviously, to just measuring a line on a map and not what exists. And so then on our central commercial, the proposed text amendment is to just prohibit altogether those in our central commercial zone. So we are recommending that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council. But of course, as is the process, we need to have a public hearing and then be happy to answer any questions that the Planning Commission has.
Okay. Well, we need to have a public hearing for this, so we'll open the public hearing now.
That's me, I'm the only one left.
Yep.
Thanks for your time, I know it's getting late. My name is Russell Nelson, and I'm actually involved with one of the existing car washes. It's the Good Spray. It's kind of that older one. It's been here for a while. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And what I'm actually not opposed to this. I think it's fine. But there is something I would like to bring up just for consideration. So right now, we're under contract with Good Spray. They want us to come in and lease that car wash and the adjacent site. They own both of those. And we want to come in and build a car wash there, basically tear it down and just improve on what is there. You know, that car wash is pretty old. It's an old bay car wash. They have long hours. It's, you know, it's kind of run down. It's looking old and tired a little bit. So we would come in and put in our brand new car wash that we do. We do the quick whack car washes. And so with the way it's worded now, with those distance requirements, pretty much all of those existing car washes, I think all but maybe one, would become a non-conforming use, which would then prohibit us from updating it and improving it. You know, earlier we spent an hour or so talking about water conservation, which I have a degree from Utah State in watershed science and earth systems, and I love what you said, Melinda. The drought is not over. A lot of people don't think that, and it's not over. And our new car washes, these car washes we build, we reclaim 80, 90% of our water. It's, you know, when you wash your car in your driveway, you're using, you know, on average 120 gallons of water. And ours use per car, net use, is, you know, barely more than a shower, an average shower. So, you know, there's a lot of benefits to what we would do and improve on these businesses that just weren't available when this was originally built back in the mid 90s. You know, another one is, you know, if this was allowed, if there was, you know, an exception or something that would allow us to go in and improve these and expand these and create a better car wash, it would allow the city to then bring certain things up to code. I think there's a pole sign there. We don't do pole signs unless it's required. But, you know, we've built 100 of these, and you know, we do a 6 foot tall, 5 foot wide monument sign. And we have all different kinds of designs we've done on those because we meet the design requirements that the city has. It would also give an opportunity for the city to address the traffic concerns. Main Street is growing, it's getting busier. This car wash is on Main Street. And, you know, right now our proposed draft site plan that we've kind of looked at, we would probably just eliminate the accesses on Main Street. Maybe have our ingress egress off of 300 West or something like that. But that would be an opportunity to address those concerns. And so it would be an opportunity to look at lighting. You know, we're very up to date on that. We address these concerns daily in dozens of cities around the nation. That's our forte. There's a reason we're one of the fastest growing car washes in the country. We like to be a good neighbor. It's also an opportunity for just a great business to come in. Quick Whack they're awesome. We love partnering with them. So I'm with Lone Star Builders, and we build all the Quick Whack car washes in Utah for them. And you know, at the grand openings, they always do a charity. They do a fundraiser where they'll just give out a car wash. They ask for donations, they'll match it, and then they give it to a local family in need. And they actually just opened one we opened one for them in Lehigh, and in one night they raised, you know, $35,000 for a local family that was in need. And so, you know, they just do a lot of good, and it's a good opportunity to have them come in. And what I'm asking tonight, I know it's late, so I want to be brief here, but what I'm asking is just for consideration that in the ordinance, to just include some sort of language that would allow the existing car washes to be able to upgrade and improve. You know, there's different market demands or customer demands or public demands or city demands that'll come from over time, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And I think with all of these, other than one becoming a non-conforming use, they're going to get tired and become eyesores. And so I would just ask for that consideration that it would allow us to create a state-of-the-art, just awesome car wash that would just provide for more clean cars in the city. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any questions I know it's a public hearing, so I'm probably done.
Wait, I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
So the Good Spray is my favorite car wash because you could do it by hand and you don't have to go through all the things. And when you have wrap on your car, you don't want to get high pressure because it takes stuff off your car. So in the new one, this is just totally out there. But do you ever keep those bays or those just totally old school?
So we don't do bays.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and
So
there's a lot of reasons for that.
So I'll have to drive to Bountiful then?
Yeah,
The bays are
I don't know
getting
all the reasons
fewer.
why Good Spray wants to move on, but they just want to lease the site now and be done with it on their end and let us take over and build a car wash, so.
Question.
Yeah.
Let me just clarify what you said. You want to just build a different car wash on essentially the same property?
Correct, yeah, so the use would stay the same, but we would completely demo, we would
Okay.
do full concrete,
Yeah.
change the site layout. We would actually do probably a lot line adjustment to combine with their other site they own that's adjacent. Our car washes are big. It's the express tunnel car washes.
So there'd be a little more land added to the existing car wash site,
Correct.
and
yeah.
then a different car wash, larger car wash, more modern car wash
Correct.
in its place. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's a good point, because that is something that would be an additional consideration, because we would be adding an adjacent site to that, which is a little more than just the existing site. It is the same owner, and it's the same use. I guess that's not being used currently, it's vacant, but, so yeah, that is a great point.
What is on the other property?
It's vacant.
Weeds.
Vacant.
Weeds.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Has that transaction been consummated?
We're under contract currently.
Okay.
So it's pretty early, we're in our due diligence phase, we're working through that, just creating our site plan and working through that.
So for the record, you have plans to invest on that property based on the zoning that is in place right now in regards to this issue?
Correct.
Not change the use, have a car wash use,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, we wouldn't ask for a rezone or a text amendment or anything like that, so, we should have applied earlier today before, well, I guess it's gotta go to city council, but, we're not ready to apply yet, we're still, there's some work on our end, still, as you know, commercial development takes time
Yeah.
and a lot of engineering and our due diligence, so.
Yeah.
Is that vacant land currently zoned the same as a car wash?
I believe it's the same zone.
That was going to be my next question.
It's all
It's
general
good question.
commercial.
Yeah, it's commercial.
So,
General.
General plan is mixed use, right?
yes. Yes. So, and that's, again, part of the reason for the text amendment. So, both properties are owned by Good Spray, and I think what Russ is saying here is that they would intend to expand the use, tear down, but expand the use onto 2 parcels. Or a lot line adjustment, which again is expanding the use. So, and I think also what he's referring to is we do have a chapter on non-conforming uses, and we don't allow those to be expanded. So what he's asking for essentially is that we not have, if this text amendment goes forward and gets approved, that we not have this chapter be applicable to that particular use. And so.
So Melinda, when I look at this, I mean, we do have the provision in there that says that the planning commission can authorize a more desirable non-conforming use to be substituted for one. And, I mean, we could make a decision on that basis as to whether we think this newer, more modern car wash would be better than having that old rundown car wash.
Yep.
I don't mean to be, denigrate the car wash that's there now, but, look at it that way. I mean, it looks like it gives us that option to consider that.
Yeah, it's right there. So that is something that they could request the planning commission determine the applicability on. I do think that upgrading that, I mean, I think that would be more appealing than what exists right
yeah.
now. The bigger question is,
Yeah.
does that fit our long-term
Right.
vision?
And that's always the dilemma of the
Right.
non-conforming stuff, isn't it? I mean, the whole purpose of making something non-conforming is that you hope it's going to go away, eventually. And that's why you don't allow them to do a lot of things that normally other business owners would, or whatever the use is, with the intent of being, they're finally going to say, forget this, let's just give this up and leave. And that's kind of what you hope for. That's why you make it non-conforming. The problem is, if they don't leave, you're stuck with something that really doesn't look good.
Yeah.
And it has the right to just stay there. So that's the dilemma of the non-conformity stuff. But that item number 1 there does seem to give us some ability to maybe allow for some improvement. I don't know though, because if it really does seem to be pretty strong about not enlarging it.
And that point 1 is talking about substituting,
Yeah,
which this wouldn't be.
Yeah.
This would be expanding.
yeah.
Right, so would that substitute be, hey, we don't allow drive-throughs, because that's also not pedestrian oriented, but would a drive-through be better than what the current use is? And I don't know if that's really what it's relating to or not, but obviously that'd be something that the planning commission would have to
Oh, yeah.
consider if that was an application that came into us or a request that came into us.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I mean, if it were to stay the same size and they were just, making the change not to have the bays, but if it's going to be a better looking building and nicer and, that would probably be okay. The problem is when we get into expansion.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're done. So I think we'll just close the public hearing. And then is there any other discussion that we need to talk about here? Or?
This may not be germane, but I know that Johnny's Car Wash was up for sale. Is that still in play, or is it not anymore?
It's been sold and it's under management.
Oh, okay, so it's gonna stay,
For new ownership.
okay,
John's, it's over.
by Bowman's, well,
Behind.
yeah,
Back
right
down
by
there.
there.
Behind
Yeah.
Ace, yeah.
Ace, yeah.
Well, I have to say generally, I mean, what Melinda and staff are proposing here is, if we're trying to make a more walkable, a more mixed use, a more downtown friendly kind of an atmosphere, to me, it makes sense. Why do you want auto-oriented businesses in the middle of that?
Well, and I've been reading city ordinances this week, and, I mean, you look at Saratoga Springs, they put in a gateway buffer zone, limiting what goes in there, so no auto sales and a bunch of other businesses. They're doing the same now with along the lake shore and some other areas. I mean, it's if you want your community to look a certain way, you have to use zoning in that manner. So I think,
Yeah.
That's fair.
Well, and I think to get to that point, there's a lot of work that has to be done. But this was just one that crept up. That is a large concentration of car washes, and I think in particular tunnel car washes within a very close proximity to each other. And so I think this is just one of those, it was very obvious and something that was kind of easy to bring forward other than, right, I mean, ideally what we need to do is completely overhaul our central commercial code and then also, bleed that over into the rest of the Main Street area and that 200 North that we really want to redevelop in a fashion that is, I guess, a lot better than what it exists now, kind of the piecemealed and the, that partitioned off development that you tend to get when you don't have a cohesive code.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would almost be in favor of, we've started the clock, right? By talking about this now, we've kind of started the clock on looking at changing the ordinance here, so we essentially have 6 months, like we just talked about on the sign thing.
Yep.
If that's the case, when we talk about what Melinda talked about here at the very beginning about what we're trying to create, I would be in favor of looking at all automobile-oriented businesses, not just car washes, but whatever may be automobile-oriented, and whether we ought to be looking at, prohibiting or restricting or doing something within this area, and go beyond maybe just car washes.
That is a lot for
Yeah.
our very small department
I know.
to bite off in one little bit. And so, you know, my preference would be, if you want to go in that direction, I think we would just move this forward, but know that that is something that we definitely want to do. I think once we get that community reinvestment area approved, that'll give us a little bit more strength also to go back and look at those ordinances and even use some upcoming funding. You know, candidly, just with the resources and the staffing that we have, I hesitate even to make a 6-month commitment on something like this, because it is a lot to get right. I think we just did that with the mixed use ordinance. That was quite a bit of work as well. Actually some fun work. I enjoyed that, but it would take a lot of thought to get where we need to be. And it's definitely one of those next steps that we need to have done. But,
Good point.
But also I have some other things in the queue that really, unfortunately would
Take your time.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Melinda, can't you do it all?
Well, I try.
Yeah.
Unsuccessfully most of the time, but, but again, we do have 180 days here, and
Yeah.
if the commission as a whole wants to bite off a bigger chunk of that, then we'll work as fast and furious as we can and put some of those other things aside and make this a priority.
Can I make a motion? If we're serious about implementing the general plan, this is right in line with that. So I make a motion that we recommend approval for the proposed text amendments for Title 17-19-8 prohibited uses and 17-20-8 prohibited uses.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a recommendation for approval and a second.
If
So
I can maybe
you've amended
just
it?
add a discussion.
Yeah.
A little bit of discussion to that. I agree, and I think, but I really think this is a good first step, because I think we ought to really be looking at a bunch of other things in this area to improve what we're trying to create here according to our general plan. So let's move forward with this, but let's not stop here.
And I'll amend my second. I'd like to say also, I think that we need to, and I know you have work and you've got your small department, but I think if you're going to go this direction, the city, and I've said this before in public comments and other places, the city needs to consider small area plans with designated overlay zones that have these types of zoning designated in there to create the community feel that allows that to happen, because then you get the type of city you want and not the city the developers kind of push in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would like to see, of course, it would take a while before any increment would be generated, but I would like to see the same for our city center designation that we put forth in the general plan. So I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah.
I apologize, I had to step out. I did have a couple of comments for consideration, but I know there's a motion on the table, so maybe these can be addressed later. I'm perfectly fine with the prohibition of car washes and GC. We got a ton of them. But I think Mr. Nelson raised a very valid point. I don't know if this was discussed when I left the room, but I think it is important to carve out some caveats for existing uses.
We talked a little bit about that.
Okay.
Let me show it. Well, we'll
Okay.
show you what Melinda pulled up.
Okay, good.
And what we can take a look at this item number 1 here. You can read it on your screen there.
Okay, yes, that's boilerplate language I have seen from other locations. I wonder if that gives us enough cover, though I wonder if it's specific enough to give us enough cover, because it says a use which is more desirable. To me, the connotation is it's a different use. And what I'm concerned about from Mr. Nelson's perspective, and I've got a little story to elucidate what I'm talking about, and I beg your pardon because it's late, but in Holiday, where we did a little downtown center, we had a specific problem that we needed to address. And that was to have a walkable downtown, which we're calling out here, to have a walkable downtown and pedestrian-oriented car washes sure as heck don't fit the bill. Car washes they are killers in terms of property tax and revenue. To me, I love car washes. I use them. I go to yours in particular many times. But I would say that there are LULUs, locally unwanted land uses, like storage units, that are absolute nightmares because they give very little back to the community. And in terms of property tax and sales tax, those kinds of things. Now, I'm sure the car wash is going to do some revenue and we'd get some revenue out of it. But going back to Holiday wanted to create a cute little downtown area. And we spent years and years working on it. One of the provisions that we had in our general plan and in our zoning ordinance was the prohibition of new drive-through uses. We felt that it was antithetical to get a cute walkable downtown area and have drive-through uses like restaurant, like, Apollo Burger, which was down there for a long time, or banks. No matter how good the building looked, we felt that new additional drive-throughs were an absolute no-no. And for about 14 years straight, the city struggled with the concept of what do we do with those existing uses that already have a drive-through use. And you'll make the connection here in a second. What happened was we had uses in the downtown area that we had a dry cleaner that had been there for 100 years. Frampton Cleaners. They had been around since the early 1900s or 70 years. I mean, it was some colossal figure. And they kept coming to the city saying, we want to we want to upgrade. They had wood it was driftwood on the outside of the building. And the city said no. And the city said no to other places that said, we just want to keep the use, but we need to keep our drive-throughs. So we didn't allow them to upgrade their building. So basically it was an investment in disinvestment in their property. So what I'm concerned about from his perspective is, I want to make sure that we handle this correctly because it took 14 years of pushing the council to get the council to finally agree that a drive-through burger place that had been there for decades would be allowed to completely take their building down, which is what you're proposing, and that they could rebuild and not be caught by the non-conforming provision, which generally says you cannot modify, enlarge, expand. That's why I asked those questions, because if you're going to modify, enlarge, expand, or take the building completely down, many ordinances and even the building code say, a lot of zoning ordinances say, if you modify your building more than 50% in terms of construction, now you're completely gone. You lose your grandfathered right to stay. And that's why these are important questions, because if what this does says that we are now going to have a bunch of car washes that get continually older, they can't keep up with the times, they need to expand their footprint. Lots of ordinances say you can't do that. And we need to be careful, I think, to not eliminate uses that are there or investment in uses that were already established before. So, Planning Commission, did we talk about this in terms of what I'm saying? Because it's a big deal, I think, to take somebody who's been around and wants to invest in your community to say, no, you can't change your use one iota, because then it's a gotcha provision. So what I was going to suggest is that we make sure that we send this on to make sure that they're not going to be nixed by this, and that language is more clear, that says pre-existing uses, car washes, if you're going to take them out, you need to have something in there that says those pre-existing uses can continue and be modified and have some kind of parameters of how they can be modified, unless the city's intent is to say, no, sorry, super spray, nope, you're stuck just the way you are. Go ahead and add property. You're not going to be able to do anything over there. And that's an important thought. And so one suggestion I was going to make was that the language that you've included in the staff report, Melinda, says, bring vitality, vibrancy, and contribute. I certainly think that's a foundation for a motion to say, yes, let's take the use out of the zone. But I think there's a fairness provision that says we ought to consider how that will affect those that are there. And so I think a general plan amendment, like Steve was recommending, a small area plan might be really helpful to look at this downtown area and go, okay, what don't we want in it? And what do we want in it? Do we allow for grandfathering or not, and to what extent? And then the other concern I had was, my experience has been again and again and again that distance provisions are not supportable in court.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
We have to be
as well.
very careful. I had city attorneys again and again, every time we tried to install separation rules, they'd say, nope, you can't do that. That's restraint of trade, even if it's, you know, if it's, so I think we have to be very careful there. We tried doing it with assisted living and Holiday. Because the public and the council, everybody's saying, no, these assisted living centers, they're going out in the most prime real estate. They're going out in the river bottom. They're going down by Cotton Creek. And we would say, it's a federally protected use, folks. And they'd build a 15,000 square foot, it looked like a mansion in an assisted living center. And they'd say, the end of the world. It's the end of the world. It's REM. Oh my gosh. We'll never recover from having these assisted living centers. Well, we tried to put in a provision that said you couldn't have one within 1,500 feet of another. Nope, city attorney said, I'm not going to try to defend that in court. So I don't know if our attorney's been, what? Actually, no. Yeah, it was Todd Godfrey with Mazarin Hayes.
So what would you propose instead, Paul? Would it be better just to have like a map that just determines where you can and cannot do it?
Yeah, I think what you do is you make sure that in this case, even though the general plan.
We don't know if we can really do that. But it's run into trouble before in other places.
Yeah.
Main Street.
Or if you did a gateway overlay.
After the.
One anywhere near me in Kaysville, because I'm out in the far southwest corner. But certainly on that collector, that major collector, which is Main Street, or excuse me, 200 North. I said Main Street when I meant 200 North. How do you handle that on the west side? Can you write it so you say, okay, east of I-15 in the general commercial zone, you can't have car washes, but on the west side, we will? I would love it if we could write it that way, and maybe we can, but that'd be my